Try and call you or something separately.
We'd like to call this evening's budget meeting to order. Welcoming our media listening audience. Madam Clerk, the council microphones are open for roll call.
Mayor Artis.
Here.
Councilmember Akeson.
Here.
Councilmember Sear. Councilmember Grayeb.
Here.
Councilmember Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Montalongo. Councilmember Moore.
Here.
Councilmember Euler.
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach.
Here.
Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Here.
And Councilmember Turner. You have a quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'd like to invite everyone to join us and stand for a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilman Grayeb.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes of the last City Council meeting as outlined.
Motion seconded by Councilmember Riggenbach. Are there any changes or discussion on the minutes? Seeing no lights, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Our first item is 18-185 is a request to receive and file an appraisal assistance agreement with the CEO Council.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What you have in front of you this evening is a copy of the agreement, the appraisal assistance agreement between the CEO Council and the City of Peoria. We have been working in concert with the CEO Council to get the agreement completed, and we wanted to bring it forward this evening. The plan would be that this is, since tonight's motion is simply just a receive and file, that we would have a meeting on October 30th. We're going to have our budget hearing that evening, but then conclude the budget hearing, not have anything else. That's the time for the public to comment on the budget. And not have anything else done that evening other than taking up this matter for action. And as well, it would be the matter pertaining to the purchase option itself, because that has to be part of this. What are the elements that are, in just quick summary, what are the elements in this agreement? What it talks about is that this is an appraisal assistance agreement. The CEO Council is offering $400,000 to assist in the appraisal and the valuation process. So that's what they're making as part of this agreement. With that, it includes language that makes it clear that we have the option to buy the water company every 5 years, and that we are partnering and working together to move down that path of trying to make sure that the city gets the best possible price if we work towards the purchase of the waterworks. The next part of the meat of the agreement talks about the fact that it would be effective once the CEO Council puts up the $400,000 and the City Council then acts on the purchase option itself. So once that is stated, that we've notified Illinois American Water that we have expressed our intent as a city to purchase the water company, then that would trigger this agreement going forward. Then we would start to move into the process of selecting experts that would assist us. And Section 3 of the agreement talks about that. It talks about how the city will work towards selecting an appraisal team that will make sure that we hire the arbitrator that will be part of that valuation team. We'll work with the CEO Council to make sure that they have an opportunity to interview the members of that committee and that we're working with them to make sure that we have a mechanism for resolving any differences if we have differences of opinion over how we would select members of that committee. Once we would do that, then it talks about how we would use the funds in Section 4. And it says here that we're using these funds to make sure that we're hiring the appraisal team and for the purposes of going down that path of making sure that we're buying the water company. And then Section 5 talks about proceeding with the appraisal, that we're going to work towards trying to make sure that we drive to the lowest possible price as we go forward with that. And then Section 6 talks about the mechanism by which they will repay us for the costs that we incur during that process. Sections 7, 8, and 9 of the agreement talk about the return of unused funds. That says that any advances that we don't use, we have to return for them. Section 8 talks about the fact that if we then go down the path of purchasing the waterworks and there's still unspent funds that are available, we would return those. And then Section 9 talks about the fact that if there is any need for additional funding, that the CEO Council would move forward with endeavoring to try and raise those additional funds. There's no commitment, but it does say that they are endeavoring to do so, to try and raise those additional funds. Section 10 is kind of the legalese that pertains to the restrictions on the lawsuit. The city has some restrictions that we covenant not to sue, and then obviously the CEO Council covenants not to sue, and those particulars are laid out in Section 11. And then we have some general terms that are laid out in Section 11, and that would basically outline the entire document. And we, both Corporation Counsel Leist and I, would be happy to answer any questions that Council may have about the agreement.
Okay. Why don't we start with a motion to receive and file, and then we'll have discussion. Motion by Councilmember Jensen, seconded by Councilmember Euler. Discussion. I have Councilman Sear first, and then Councilwoman Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question for Mr. Leist. I'm a little uncomfortable with a few words in this agreement. Words like consulting, authorized, approved. My only question would be, as a body, we cover the CEO Council. What about individual? Can individuals from the CEO Council, if for whatever reason, could they sue us if they are not satisfied?
This agreement, although I think we intended to include that when the agreement was drafted, I think we can make that clear that in Section 10 that the CEO Council nor any of its individual members may sue the city for breach of this contract. So we can make that amendment.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I would like to request to give privilege of the floor to Tom Flakey, who was the head of the team from the CEO Council. If he could just briefly address the council.
Seeing no objection, Mr. Flakey.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, first of all, my apologies this evening for my voice. I'm on the other side of influenza. I strongly recommend that if you're on the fence about whether or not to get a flu shot, get off the fence. This one's been nasty. In response to Councilwoman Jensen's request for me to speak to you, I don't really have much to say. Quite frankly, this is a pretty simple proposition. Beginning 4 years ago, the CEO Council endeavored a study to be able to help the City Council make fact-based decision on whether or not buying the water company is a good idea or not a good idea. It doesn't have anything to do with politics or personalities. It's simply about whether or not this is a good business proposition. It took us 18 months, 5 subcommittees meeting once a month, bringing together their findings, and eventually we presented to you in September of 16 our report. In August of 16, we presented the same to the CEO Council, which unanimously instructed us to present this to you, to present this to the community, and also, if necessary, to endeavor to raise funds to assist with an eventual appraisal. That's exactly what we did. And last January, I personally delivered a letter to each of you outlining our proposal to offer $400,000. There's no interest involved in this. If the money's not spent, yeah, we'd like it back. If we buy the water company, yeah, we'd like it back. But if we do the appraisal and the decision is that this is a bad deal for the city of Peoria, then too bad, so sad, we're out to $400K. There's been a lot of activity in the past by other people. Peoria Area Advancement Group is one that I'm sure we're all aware of. But in the end, this is the CEO Council who did the study and who raised the money. I will tell you that this morning I received a call from one of the members of the Peoria Area Advancement Group advising me that should we need to increase the funds available for the appraisal from $400,000 to $700,000, they were willing to make that money available. These are people that have the best interests of our community at heart. And their focus here is to be able to find out whether or not this is a good deal or a bad deal. It's just that simple. Not any more complicated than that. Forget about all the character assassination. Forget about the politics. Forget about the personalities. Is this a good deal for Peoria? Now, our study, based on the numbers we were able to access, suggested that the city of Peoria, once it pays off the water company through a bond over 25 years, could reap in today's dollars some $15 million a year. That's significant money that our community needs. We're in deep trouble financially. You don't need me to tell you that. We all know that. We should be looking under every rock for revenue sources that do not involve raising taxes or fees. We're already driving away business and individuals with high taxes and high fees. Look at the folks that we compete against. Look at the states we compete against. Look at the regions we compete against. We cannot afford not to do due diligence. We must look at every option. I'll be the first one to tell you that if we do that due diligence and we come up with a number that doesn't make sense, the CEO Council and I will be standing here saying, don't do that. This isn't about buying the water company at any expense whatsoever. This isn't because we think the water company does a bad job or hasn't been delivering quality water. It doesn't have anything to do with this. This is about the revenue stream that we need to find for our community to be financially viable. I have a hard time believing that there's anyone who doesn't even want to know. We're going to sit behind the horseshoe at some point in the future and say, citizens, we're raising your taxes again, or we're raising your fees again, but we didn't exhaust every other possible opportunity, then there's going to be some serious questions raised about your decision-making ability. The fact of the matter is, this is a no-brainer. These are folks who have done a study. These are folks who have raised money. These are folks who are getting nothing out of this but the desire to help their community. That's why I'm standing before you this evening. We're paying twice as much as the national average for our water. We're paying far more than our neighbors do for water, yet we live next to a river and we sit atop a shallow aquifer full of excellent water. Why are we paying all of that money? Why is that revenue source going out of our community when it should be retained right here? That's the motivation behind this, no more, no less. Forget the politics, forget the character assassination, forget the personalities, forget whatever's gone on in the past on this issue, because this is about today. Can we afford not to look? Can we afford not to know? Can we afford not to investigate? And in fact, in this instance, there are people willing to finance that investment.
Mr. Fleege, I'm just going to, a brief statement. We're going to probably hear all this again next Tuesday. So we're looking for brief. And once you say again, it means you already said it. So with all due respect, I'll just ask you to wrap it up.
My apologies, Mr. Mayor. I've said what I came to say. And
Thank
quite
you.
frankly, I wasn't planning on speaking at all. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell you.
Thank you.
should I remain here to answer any questions that might be forthcoming?
Did you have a question? We have one question here for Mr. Fleege. Councilman Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We got some kind of a pamphlet here that someone dropped off on our desk titled "City Loses Again," and it looks like it's tying together the fact that the CEO Council and the PAG group is essentially one and the same, and both will likely sue us, and that we will have to pay, essentially, is what I'm getting out of this. Can you address those questions as we're looking at this agreement between the CEO Council and what's behind both of these groups, and what may or may not be different here?
I can't speak to whoever left that flyer or whatever on your desk. I can simply tell you that the CEO Council has worked diligently with the city manager and the city attorney to craft an agreement that should be acceptable. In fact, the city manager has told us that he expects to recommend approval of this document. The reason is that there are so many safeguards and so many checks and balances. I was not involved with the Peoria Area Advancement Group some 20 years ago. I have been involved with this effort for the last 4 years. Anybody that contends that they are one and the same person has an agenda. The fact of the matter is, we did an independent study. You've seen that study. The fact of the matter is, we raised the money. Now, did some of the people who wanted this to go forward before contribute? Yes, they did. We didn't say, no, you're part of the Peoria Advancement Group, you can't participate. There are people, there are citizens who have rights like everybody else, and if they want to offer money for the assistance of the city and the appraisal of this opportunity, or are we to say they can? But I can tell you that I personally have offered $25,000 of my money because I believe in Peoria, and I believe in Peoria's future. And I want to see this investigated so that we know once and for all, this is going to be a good deal for us.
Are these lights questions for Mr. Fleege? Okay. Councilwoman Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Fleege, with regards to the comment you made here about the additional money up to $700,000, is the CEO Council willing to put that in the agreement? Because I have to admit that this paragraph 9 gives me, pause. It just says that the CE Council may endeavor to raise additional funds at its sole discretion if the cost of the appraisal ends up being more than $400,000. So, I'm sort of...
Question is, are we willing to put that in the agreement?
Yes.
Like I said, I got a phone call this morning from a member of that group offering the additional money. As far as the details and the donation involved, I can't speak to the details yet because I just got the phone call. But it's an indication of the fact that if we ran short at 400, there would be an effort made to raise additional funds. I'm telling you that we already have an additional 300. And we haven't even made any extreme effort out in the community to raise funds. There's enough people that want to know that I'm convinced that we'll be able to raise the necessary funds to prosecute the due diligence. Folks want to know.
So just as a follow-up, I'm saying I'd be more comfortable with, if I were to vote in favor of this, if this language was a little bit stronger than just may, that there was more of a commitment for additional funds if it's needed. So, I'm just making that point here. I know we're short on time, but this is the first opportunity we've really had to have the agreement in front of us and talk about it. And you open that door. So from my standpoint, I'm bringing that point up, and I think it might be a good idea to include that in the agreement. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Gribb.
Mr. Fleege, just stay up here. I'll try not to wear out your voice with your condition here tonight. Where in the world did we get the idea that it would cost $400,000, let's just start there, to do an effective due diligence that would determine whether or not it's financially good for the people of Peoria, their representatives, to pursue a buyout? Now, I was around when we tried to do it before, but I find this rather interesting that it's going to be 400,000 or now maybe possibly 700,000. Maybe you could illuminate, and then maybe we could have the manager give his interpretation as to why we're so costly here getting the facts.
The $400,000 figure was actually identified by one of our committee experts, Joe Glaw, former general manager of Clifton Larson Allen, who has a great deal of experience in this arena. It was his estimation that failing any significant legal action, the cost of pursuing an appraisal, engineering study, all the necessary things to do due diligence, could more than adequately be funded by an amount of $400,000.
Manager?
Councilman, I would tend to agree with Tom here, that Mr. Fleege, excuse me, that in looking at what was expended the last time we seriously looked at it, and if you take away all the legal expenses for the time that was spent arguing over whether or not the purchase contract was valid, it was roughly several $100,000 that we incurred on the city side. And then I think if you just taking in the account of what today's dollars are, I think that this is a reasonable estimate of where we are.
And now, are we factoring in the fact that there was litigation filed relative to whether or not we really did retain the right to have that 5-year window? Is that what we're factoring in?
We're not factoring that, because that question's been answered, and we have the right.
Well, I know, but so we're not. This does not contemplate litigation costs. This $400,000 or now $700,000 figure. This
is the cost of experts, lawyers, engineers to help us in the appraisal process to get to the best possible price that we can get to.
Show that when we did this last time, I said that if we could get our hands on about 6 or 7 sheets of paper, we could make this decision very easily, maybe about $80. And I still believe that. If we can identify the important information and get it, I think we can rather quickly make that decision. But yeah, I think it's interesting to hear that you're apparently willing to go more than $400,000 and maybe put that in writing. But I still believe it's a handful of sheets of paper. I don't think that it's much more than that. I don't think it was last time. We had a lot of deflection last time, and so that's my thoughts on it. I hope we can get on with it because time is growing late. Manager, one other thing. If the council decides to do the due diligence before November 1, what would be the next step after that?
Well, if the way the process works, if the majority of the council, whether you want to take and enter the appraisal assistance agreement or not, you have to, by the end of this month, notify the water company that you want to exercise the right to purchase the waterworks. If that were to happen, then there's a lengthy process that starts where we would sit down first with the water company to see if we can come up with a price. Assuming that doesn't come to a resolution that we agree to, then we would start to negotiate the rules of the order of how we're going to kind of manage this process of valuing the water company.
We had 3 parties involved.
And that's where you get the arbitrators that will rule on that. We'll select one, they'll select one, and then those 2 arbitrators will select the third. They'll then hear the testimony. There'll be an evidentiary hearing. Then they'll come up with a value. They'll deliberate, gather all the information. They'll determine a value. Once that's completed, then the council can decide go or no go. If they say go, then there's a 6-month due diligence period, true due diligence period, where we get to look at the books of the water company, dig in, and start to decide whether or not we want to purchase it at the price that's been settled.
Well, it's nearing Halloween time, and there is so much misinformation, so much nonsense out there right now on both sides. And I would just say this. People who are sending messages to the council, first of all, if you're sending a message that says, don't buy the water company, Well, we're not even at that point. We're at potentially going ahead with the due diligence process to determine whether it's smart to buy the water company. So the public needs to understand that. If you're going to send an email or a letter or a postcard, a form postcard to us, be effective with it and don't just say, you shouldn't vote to support due diligence. Speech 101. Speech 101 says before you go sending something out, you're trying to persuade somebody, anybody, even the smallest child, to do this or that, you need to probably give some reasons for it, unless you're going to say, because I said so. You know, we need intelligence now, laser sharp intelligence on this to make the best decision. And so partisans on either side of this issue, which really isn't political, I don't think it's RD, they need to realize that sending forum postcards or whatever is extremely ineffective, at least for me. Now, maybe some of the rest of you think it's cool to get stuff like this without any corroboration, but it's anti-intellectual, and it's know-nothing. Years ago, there was a party in the United States. It was a know-nothing party. This council needs to know what it's doing one way or the other. And so I think, you know, we need to keep this in mind as we continue down the road on this. And I appreciate your coming tonight, Mr. Fleege.
Okay, I had Councilmember Ruck-Riegel next.
Thank you. And I guess these questions can either be for our legal counsel or for Tom. I'm sorry, Mr. Fleege. In the recitals on F, it says the CEO Council is willing to provide substantial funds to the city for the city to engage experts. So it sounds like this really is a city process, and the city is handling this. And I guess with that in mind, I've got just two questions under number 3. On D, it says the city shall make available upon request and periodically to the CEO committee the proposed rate of charge, cost, and proposed praises. Okay, so that the CEO committee may determine relevant or important. Okay, so it sounds like there's going to be a sort of a check and balance there as far as the costs go. Is that how I'm reading that on D? Because we're going to...
It's more of a consultation than an approval by the CEO Council. They just want to be having an opportunity to interview and look at the qualifications. So it's more of a consultation.
The CEO Council has no standing in this due diligence. It's the city's party. However, we're offering our experience and expertise to assist. But it is not a quid pro quo. In fact, there's nothing in this agreement that says if we don't like what you're doing, we're going to take our money and go home. That was removed. Fact of the matter is, we've softened this thing to an agreement that should not be objectionable by anyone.
So it sounds like they're just the invoice and the charges that they're going to be agreed upon as they come through.
How it gets paid.
Okay. And then a question on F. It says at any time the CEO committee disagrees with the city on the city's choices or selection of experts, consultants, accountants, and or attorneys to make up the appraisal team or the appraiser or arbiter in the appraisal, it may notify the city. If such notice is given, the CEO committee will work with the city to resolve their differences over the selections and choices for the appraisal team. If that resolution can't be made, what happens at that point?
It still is, as the CEO Council representative indicated, it still is the city's choice. I mean, it indicates that we'll work together in good faith, but it is ultimately the city's decision.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Fleege.
I have Councilmember Regenbach next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Fleege, for the work that you've been doing on this for the last number of years. I was going to address this question to our corporation counsel, but since you brought this up, I think this is something that I want to get on the table now. It's recently, I was at the Illinois Municipal League meetings, and there was a discussion on valuation of water utilities, and the trend in Illinois, at least, is for municipalities to be selling water utilities, not buying them. And I was listening to all this with the intent of knowing that our budget situation is what it is, and you alluded to the fact that this could be a whole new source of revenue for us. Well, Illinois state law says, and I don't know all the rest of the titles here, but listen to this, and I'm sure your attorneys have looked at this as well, so I would just want your take on it, that all revenues derived from the operation of a water supply system shall be set aside as collected and deposited in a special fund designated as a municipal water fund for that locality. The fund shall be used only for the purposes of paying the cost of operating and maintaining the water supply system, improvement, or extension, and provide adequate depreciation, blah, 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 to pay off the bonds. So we've been told by many in the CEO Council group, their lobbyists who have been courting us for the last couple of years also, that this is Pandora, not Pandora's box, although it could be, I guess. This is the pot of gold that we've been looking for. So if the state law says you can't use it for those things, and we have a report back from Corporation Counsel that says that, we can use the proceeds for overhead costs and operational costs, but we're not going to be able to hire more police officers with this money. How did your attorneys for the CEO Council view that statute?
Okay, I'm going to refer this to the city manager and city attorney, but I will tell you that we did ask that question several years ago. And because Peoria is a home rule operation, we were assured that that was not a problem. Further, by the city manager. Further, in our investigation, when we spoke to the other 16 communities about this, they all indicated that they regularly utilize these funds for purposes other than strictly water operation. The fact of the matter is, I'm not saying that this is a panacea, which is the word I think you were looking for. The fact is, we've got to pay off a debt. If we buy the water company, we have to pay off a debt. It's going to take 25 years to do that. Now, our analysis revealed that we'll be able to supplement the city budget during that payoff period. But nobody has to worry about what to do with that windfall until after we've reduced our debt across 25 years. I don't know what the law is going to be at that time, and neither does anyone else. But based on what we were advised, this is not a problem for us, nor has it been for other communities that have done this.
All right. I'll have further questions for Corporation Counsel then later.
I have Councilmember Agason next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question for our city manager. I just heard you say something, and I just wanted to be sure I heard it correctly. If we approve this agreement and do the due diligence, that sets in motion a series of events, and then eventually, once we work out a price, then we get a chance to look at the books?
That's correct. That's the way that the franchise agreement from 1889 was structured. We have to agree on a price. Once that price is agreed upon through the appraisal process, then we get the opportunity to dig in and look at the books.
Okay. So maybe this is a really foolish question, and I'm sorry if it sounds dumb, but how would we figure out the price if we hadn't had a chance to look at the books? Isn't that one of the issues that everyone says we need this due diligence so that we can peel away the layers of the onion and actually look at our unique operating center, because right now it's commingled with other operating centers, right? I don't know what they're called. What other cities?
They're in a kind of a unified tariff area that they're running.
So this due diligence isn't going to bring the numbers, it's not going to make the numbers clear. Is that correct? Not until we artificially decide on a number and then we have to look at the due diligence. And what happens if we're off by $100 million? Or what happens,
Well, I think that the valuation process is somewhat prescriptive in the rules of the order of the commission that were laid out. And it talks about how each side is going to select the arbitrators or the appraisers that will look at this process. Subject matter experts that understand valuing water companies. Then there will be an evidentiary hearing where both sides will have the opportunity to bring forward witnesses, to bring forward testimony, to share that information. Once that's done, the appraiser panel will set a value. That's what happened in 2005. That's the process that would be used here again, and because that's the way that it's outlined in the franchise agreement. And so the rules of the order of how this commission, this valuation commission, operates was derived from that franchise agreement, and it's just how we've agreed to go forward with the water company in this purchase.
Oh, okay, so this doesn't even really seem to me to be due diligence. I mean, I don't understand what we're arguing all about. It seems to me that we could almost just arbitrarily come up with a number. We could just pick our appraisers. We wouldn't have to go through all this, and then we could wait until the time when they actually go through the budget, the numbers, and then make the decision up or down then based on the revenue flow. Because right now, and I suppose we should have this conversation when this is actually being discussed officially, and I guess what I'll do is I'll stop. But I appreciate you clarifying that, because I think that's been misunderstood by many people. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. I do think we're starting to go down a little rabbit hole here, because a lot of this will be discussed again in 7 days. Councilmember Graves, did you have a follow-up?
Did I have a what?
Follow-up.
I do. I want to follow up on the comments, once again, of my esteemed 3rd District councilman colleague, Timothy D. Riggenbach. Now, he has, on more than one occasion, brought up this whole issue of whether or not we can, home rule unit, whatever, use money that we're collecting in other parts of our city operation. We need a crystal clear answer for this body. That is an integral, and he keeps touching on this. I mean, he couldn't do it any more direct. He's brought it up twice now. Yes or no? Now, I personally think that's an interesting question to ask, and it's important that we know the answer. However, if we can save our people a lot of money, and I said if, I use a subjunctive mood, let's consider all the water that the folks purchase. Industry, business, education, consumers, the people living in our districts and our neighborhoods. If they can keep more of that money in their pocket and spend it elsewhere, wouldn't that be an accrued benefit for the economic vitality of our city? However, he's right. We need an answer to that question. Are you prepared to give that answer tonight so it's not murky anymore, not nebulous? Because you know we're going to fact check it.
Well, that's fine, and I expect you to. My pause is that you never speak in really crystal clear terms when you're talking about the law, because the law is by its nature sort of nebulous. It's not bright lines. But I will tell you what my opinion is in my interpretation of what those funds can be used for. Yes, those funds can be used for purposes like public works employees, or even lawyers, or accountants, or financial records. However, our financial employees. However, they must be directly attributable to the time that those employees spend on water operations. So the answer is that yes, it would relieve some pressure on the general fund. However, only so much pressure as you can reasonably relate. For example, you couldn't say we're having an attorney's 100% of an attorney funded by the water company if that attorney was not spending 100% of his or her time on the water company, but you can apportion. So there will be some some release and relief for the general fund. However, it's only a portion to the operations of the water company. Also, I've had the question posed to me whether there can be a profit. Yeah, you can make a reasonable profit, but again, that reasonable profit must be held in a separate fund for the administration of the water company. So I hope that's clear and not murky.
Squire Lice, this is not the Saudi consulate, and you don't have to worry. We want just the facts. That's what Jack Webb used to say, Dragnet, and that's where I am right now on this, just the facts. And thank you, Councilman Riggenbach, for continuing to ask that question. That is a very important question that needs to be answered, but we have the other aspect of it to consider as well, which our legal counsel just outlined. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hicks, do you have another?
It's really hard for me to say, okay, just wait, I'll just make these comments in 2 weeks or next week or whenever it's going to be. But I can't let that evaluation by our corporation counsel just hang out there, because it won't give us relief from the general fund, because we currently aren't spending money on that right now. We're not expending money on water-related operations in our finance department and our legal department. That's not accurate. So we wouldn't be getting any general fund relief. You know, once we are running the water company and we have to dedicate some attorneys and some finance people and some, you know, you go down the list, HR, everybody else, that will be in addition to what we're already doing. So it's not, excuse me, I just don't want the public to think when they hear relief from our general fund. That comparing today to tomorrow, if we own the water company, that's not accurate.
You're right.
Well, my point, Your Honor, would be that to the extent that we work, and the legal department works on water issues, some of that time could be apportioned to the water company, and thus there would be some relief. For example, working on this case itself, working on this agreement itself, that could have been apportioned to the water company. So there's always some amount of work that can be apportioned from every distinct department of the city. However, the point is understood that there would be additional activities, but my point is there would be some work that could be attributed to the water company.
So before we start on the next round of questions here, we came tonight to receive and file this information for discussion next week. 2 weeks. And I'm assuming that every one of these questions that have been asked tonight will be asked again in 2 weeks. So Mr. Fleege is generously here to, if you have a specific question to the mechanics of the offer, I assume. But when we're getting down into that next layer, I really think that that's going to happen in 2 weeks. So, not that that's going to impact any more questions. I'm just putting it out there. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I understand your point. So I just have 2 points that I want to make related to this question that's come up about whether or not the city can use some of the revenue from the water company for different things. So I ask if you would check into 2 things. One is, it's my understanding, like the city of East Peoria, who owns their water company or their water services, they combined it with their sewer utility, and they are able, if you go back and look at their budgets, they use the revenue and they put it in the general fund and they use it for other things. So I just ask if staff, either Mr. Urich or Mr. Lice, look into that, and if that's a possibility since we have a stormwater utility set up. And then my other point to look at, I know in the past, I believe Corporation Counsel Ray put in writing when this issue came up that some of the money could be used for other things. So ask, I know you weren't prepared to answer that question today on the floor, if we can have a report back on that?
Sure, and essentially I agree, and I hope I made that clear. You can use it. You can use money from the water company, and you can apportion time from employees to the extent they work on water operations, but you can't, as Councilman Riggenbach said, hire police officers with water company money. Okay, and I am familiar with former Corporation Counsel Randall Ray's opinion, and he did write an opinion that indicated that he thought a reasonable profit could be obtained. But I'm not aware of any opinion that he drafted that said you could use water funds for any purpose not related to the operation of the water company. So, but if you have such a document, I'd be glad to look at it. But I haven't seen anything like that from Mr. Ray. But I can check out the East Peoria reference you made.
Okay, and then I have one more follow-up related to that, to this same issue. Wouldn't the use of the revenue, the profits for road work that is also connected to the water pipes and the water structure be something that would be reasonable and fit under that, similar to what we did on Main and University when there was a big water main break there? Well, that road work that was done, and that was a lot of extra, was also done to fix the water main break. And so the way that I see that is we could shift some of our money that's put aside for roads, because part of the road work is part of what would be done to maintain the water structure.
Water main breaks, I would say yes. Clearly because we operate the water company and they cause damage to the road, so that money could be utilized. Each expenditure would have to be scrutinized carefully to make sure that it's rationally related to the operation of the water company. So it's hard to make that judgment in a vacuum, but we have to be able to reasonably relate it to the operation of a water company.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Sear.
Can I call for a vote on the motion, Mr. Chairman?
I'm not seeing any more lights here anyway, so we are at a point to vote on the motion. Mr. Corporation Counsel, I do think that this may be about the most important question that we have before we make the decision on whether or not to go the next step. If the determination is that we can only use it on the limited scope that you said, there's a big difference between that amount. I'm not sure what your definition of reasonable would be, but whatever. I'm assuming that reasonable isn't the $15 million a year figure that we heard either. So I really think that we have to make sure we have a good, solid opinion. I don't really care what other communities are doing or they're spending it on if they're not doing it legally. So I think that we have to get a good, solid answer to this in 2 weeks when we come back.
I'll be glad to provide before we meet. I'll be glad to give you that written opinion.
Thank you. So we have a motion to receive and file in a second. Please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Fleege. Madam Clerk.
18-301 is a communication from the city, from Councilmember Sid Ruckriegel with a request for a first reading of the following. A is to approve a resolution excluding city council members from participation in IMRF. B is to approve a resolution excluding city council members from the participation in a City of Peoria health plan. And C is to adopt an ordinance setting the compensation for certain elected officials of the City of Peoria.
Thank you. So this is a first reading. Typically, we ask if there's any questions for staff, but since this is from a specific council member, if Councilman Ruckriegel would like to take questions or comment, we'll start it that way.
Thank you, Mayor. What we have in front of us tonight is a first reading, as was said. And I think it's important to recognize that at this time that we are in budget conversations, and we do face a monumental deficit that we will be working on over the next couple of weeks. And in the past couple of months, we've asked our team here at City Hall to be able to take furloughs. We've done layoffs, and we've asked them to all be able to do a little bit more for a little bit less in a way, and help us balance the budget that we set and we create, and in many ways we administer because we make the decisions. And not long ago, just a couple of months this past summer, we even had a staff member who got up and spoke about having just been recently before that hired a position evidently which was needed and necessary because she went through the hiring process, only to be within a couple of weeks let go because of the layoffs that we needed to do. We also are at a time frame where we need to be able to set the salary ranges and the compensation packages for the at-large city council members. And so this resolution, and I'll kind of discuss all three here together, even though we've got them in three motions, really addresses those things. One is, and I think that it's important to know that there are thresholds for benefits, and as we are the policymakers and also the people who really are in charge of making sure that policies are enforced, I think there's a special light on us to make sure that we do things with the most transparent of options. The first piece would be the 1,000 hours requirement for the pension system. And with that, it says, and we passed a resolution several years ago that said that 1,000 hours was required for the position. We do not have any sort of safety net or program to check to see if 1,000 hours, and while I'm sure many council people do put in a lot of time, this would be about 18 hours a week, and there's no way to verify that. And it's also kind of ironic that many times throughout the year we will talk about the pension system as being part of the problem of obligations that we have going forward, and yet instead of being an example and pulling ourselves out of that for what really is a part-time civic responsibility, where in our community many other boards, such as the school board or the park board, are not compensated for, we are participating in this. And so that is why in this I have proposed the elimination of that benefit. On the next page is a requirement that we have for our city staff members to work on average 30 hours a week minimum to be able to participate in our health plan. Yet we, as the leaders of the organization, as those elected to represent the city, are putting upon ourselves the option for a health plan without those same requirements, especially within light of our financial situation and the fact that, again, we ought to be partaking with our staff members on those same qualifications, that it does seem to me, and I'll use the word disingenuous, that we would offer to ourselves at a different threshold an option that we do not offer to our staff. Again, not questioning the quality of work, but the fact that as leaders, we should be setting ourselves as the example. And because every dollar we save, and I don't have a doubt that this will not save the $6 million that right now we anticipate, but every dollar we save can go to help keep those staff members on the front lines. And that is what we're here for, is making sure that the city services to the residents are being taken care of. On the third page, which actually has the compensation package for the at-large, which does need to be approved prior to the election, it has the 16.5 salary. And I think if there's any question about whether this is full or part-time, the federal guidelines would say that that is actually even under a salaried exempt full-time position. So I think that there is no doubt about full or part-time is how we viewed it. And then on auto allowance, we had $400. If we use the federal mileage dollar amount, that would mean that we are on a monthly basis saying that we drive 747 miles strictly for city business. realizing that you can't count the miles from your house to the first stop as part of that if you actually go by the federal system on how they calculate mileage. And so therefore, I put in a number to be able to do in the first reading for $100, which takes us to about 170 plus miles on there. With these three changes, I think that we not only show that we will share in the sacrifices with the rest of our team, but I think that we actually bring into light and into the legal standing the guidelines which we put forward. Again, we set a 1,000-hour minimum required threshold for IRMF. That is their requirement, and this way we actually remove ourselves from having to prove that, which I don't think we've had in a couple of years. Actually, a affirmation by any of the council members that they have done that. I think it just kind of rolls over from the resolution. So with that, I'll be happy to take questions, or we'll pass it over to legal.
Does legal have any comment on this? Okay. Questions for Councilmember Ruckriegel? We would need a motion to receive and file. Councilman Graham, motion to receive and file. Second by Councilmember Sear. Further discussion? Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank Councilman Ruckriegel for bringing this forward, because I think as we talk about the budget, it's clear that everything has to be on the table, and we've used that expression over and over again. So this, I think, just exemplifies the fact that we're looking under every rug and every nook and cranny to see what we need to do. And whether all of these end up being exactly the way they're outlined here in this first reading or not, it's not the point, but we need to get the ball rolling, and we need to set that example. So thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Akeson.
Thank you. I'm kind of curious. I'm just right now going online to try to figure this out, but I don't think, I'm pretty confident that I haven't taken any IMRF benefits ever since I've joined the council, and I'm not sure whether this has been, you've done any, I mean, I would be interested to know how many people this will affect, because I think that the information's online, but I know that I haven't pulled any benefits at all. No retirement and no health care. So, you know, hey, good for me, right? But I wonder if for people who might need this, I mean, I don't know, you know, I understand it's an overture of sharing the pain. And you, I think at the last one of the council meetings, even thought we should turn our salary over, or half our salary, or part of it, or something over. And I've already done that. So you're going to at least, I mean, I would think that when we have members on the council who really need the benefit, then I think it should be available to them. But it's just, you know, for what it's worth.
Okay. Councilmember Ruckriegel.
I guess just a little bit of additional information. The amount that we would be looking that this would save us for next year would be a little over $62,000. The following year, as all things being equal, it would add an additional $8,000 to that, just because on the auto allowance there's sort of a separation there where it would take place. But with these benefits being offered, there's not a ceiling as to the number of participants. There can always be up to the 10 participants if they choose to join them at some time. And so therefore it's sort of you don't know what that top amount eventually could be unless you know the number that would take it from year to year. But what it does do is it limits that liability that we have as a council. And, you know, I had one suggestion from a council member that, well, maybe for transparency, it might be easier to actually put it all just in the salary line, and then people can dole those dollars out wherever they would like. From a citizen standpoint, that probably is maybe a little bit more transparent, because asking a couple of citizens today what the council members made, they said 16.5 and were unaware of any of the other benefit package. And in a compensation package, we have to include all of those pieces that come in.
Okay. I'm seeing no further lights. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
18-302 is a request to receive and file a presentation and discussion of the 2019 revised budget.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have several slides that I want to walk through, and this evening was intended to be a policy discussion regarding the budget. The intent would be that we get hopefully get some direction tonight from you to finalize a budget proposal that we can bring forward to act on it here over the next month or so. The problem that we face in the city right now is that our budget problem is a general fund problem. We are spending considerably more in the general fund than we are bringing in revenues. For 2019, if we look at it, we have $93.6 million of projected sources. That's revenues that are coming in and transfers from other funds. We have projected uses of $98.6 million. So that is a decrease in fund balance of $5 million, and would include no replenishment of our fund balances. So looking at this going forward, I'm asking tonight for some direction from council, specifically on a couple of questions. One, what is the amount of fund balance you want us to try and replenish every year? We've, over the last couple of years, have drawn down our cash reserves. Two, how do you want us to go about doing that? Do you want us to focus more on the expense side, more on the revenue side, or go straight down the middle? And so with that, we've put together a couple of scenarios that talk about the general fund and where we are today. So this first scenario simply shows you the general fund if nothing changes, if there is no increase in property taxes, if there is no change in service levels, what we would be looking at for the next 5 years within the general fund. So it would assume first in the uses column, which is over on the column at the bottom row near the bottom, is a column called transfers. And you'll see that we are putting in $11.1 million, and it's growing over time in transfers from the general fund. That is monies that would have to be transferred out of the general fund, current revenues that would have to be transferred out of the general fund to pay for pension costs, public safety pension costs. We'll have, if council does not direct an increase in the property tax rate, that's the direction that we would be heading in, is having to take current revenues out of the general fund in order to pay those public safety pension costs. This assumes that we would also pay that PAG judgment from the general fund balance, and then we would then have to continue with the levels of service that we currently have today. If all of that were to occur, we would see a reduction of $23.1 million over the next 5 years. Well, we don't have $23.1 million in the general fund. We're down to about $3 million of unassigned fund balance in the general fund. So we would be exhausting any opportunity that we had to go forward with this. On an annual basis, you see it's $5 million in 2019. It would be $2.5 million in 2020. It would be $4 million in 2021. It would be $5.4 million in 2022, and then $6.2 million in 2023. So this is the challenge and the conundrum that we face, is that we simply have an expense base that is running higher than the revenues that we're bringing in as a city. Scenario 2, which is the next slide that we have here, does a couple things. First, you'll see I've put in bold and italics under local revenue sources the number 57.8 in the year 2019. That assumes that the PAG costs of $2 million or $2.1 million would be paid for with a property tax, that we would levy a tax to pay that. This is a judgment. Judgments are an allowable payment to be made by property taxes. This would be one way that we could legally go about paying that judgment off. It would also assume that we would continue to use the transfers to fund our pension costs, but it would then also necessitate that we would have to make reductions in the expense side of the equation. So this would assume that we would have to reduce service levels by $5 million if we were to do that. So it would be putting $2 million of paying the PAG lawsuit but into a property tax, but we would still have to reduce $5 million out of the operating budget in order to put $2 million a year into fund balance. Now, when we discussed this at our last policy session, we talked about stretching out over a 10-year period of time. What would it be if we were to look at putting or replenishing our fund balances over a 10-year period? $2 million a year moves us in that path towards getting to a 10-year replenishment of our general fund reserves. So that's what that moves towards. So that just shows you that $5 million, what that impact would be in terms of the cost that it would be in terms of expense reductions that we would have to make. Scenario 3 simply says, okay, if we were to take our public safety pension costs and we're going to allow the property tax rate to float with those additional costs for public safety pensions, what would that mean? Well, we know that there's an additional $1.4 million of additional expenses that we have in the general fund or our pensions for public safety purposes that we would have to cover. There's also, when we know that we have a tax base that's contracting, you'd have to, in order to levy the same amount, you'd have to raise the rate a little bit in order to accomplish that. So that would be included in those numbers as well. If we assume that for 1 year we would pay that PAG lawsuit and pay that back, that would be in 2019, and then it would drop off in 2019. Doing that, it reduces the amount of reductions we need to make in the general fund down to $2.7 million. So the number of reductions reduces if we're able to make some of these adjustments and utilize property taxes to fund the legacy costs that we have in public safety, as well as paying off the judgment of the PAG lawsuit. What would be the property tax implications of that? Well, this would be a scenario that would show you what the property tax rate would look like over the next 5 years if we just allowed it to float with the cost, the higher cost that we have for pensions. And this is the fully loaded city and library. So this is 17% of your property tax bill because it includes the libraries as well. In 2018, the tax rate was $1.54 or $1.55 if you round up. It would go up 20 cents, and it would cost the owner of a $100,000 home, it would be $54 in that first year to do that. Year 2, because now we don't have the PAG judgment, we would actually see that the rate would drop down to $1.72. That would be a $6 reduction in the cost to the owner of a $100,000 home. And so the cumulative cost would be about $48 over that 2-year period, paying off the PAG lawsuit and then covering those pension costs for 2 years. The rate continues to climb in years 21, 22, and 23 with a 5-year cumulative cost to the homeowner of a $100,000 home of $121. So that would be, if we were to look at property taxes to fund pension costs, that's one of the aspects that would, and to also cover the PAG lawsuit, that would be the fiscal impact of those dollars. Now, in the budget report backs, and I'd be happy to talk about any questions council has on the budget report backs that we put together, we did talk about the public safety pension fee model that Danville had put together. They are currently levying a fee as a home rule community on every property in their city that has a structure on it. And they've got it set up so that properties that are under 5,000 square feet are paying $267 per parcel. And then properties that are over 5,000 square feet are paying $600 per parcel. Unless your assessed value is over $40,000, then your charge is $1,000. Looking at that, they're anticipating that they're going to bring in about $3 million with that revenue stream. Looking at from the city side, what we were looking at there is if we had 49,000 parcels in the city, if we took out the properties that don't have structures, if we took out some of the city-owned parcels, we'd be at about 43,500 parcels in total inside the city. So, if you were to look at a fee that was $50 per parcel, you'd be looking at about $2.2 million you'd be able to generate. If you were looking at a fee of $100, you'd be looking at $4.4 million that you would be able to generate with that. Obviously, we've talked in the past about the packaged liquor as being one of the taxes that we could potentially look at. That would generate about $700,000. The motor vehicle registration fee, if we were to set it at $30 per vehicle and then $6 for seniors, we're thinking about $1.6 million in revenue, but yet we'd have to net out about $600,000 of additional expenses that we would have. The challenge, obviously, with the motor vehicle tax when you're looking at the amount of expense you have is that it's very labor intensive to do so. So I can just leave it at that, or I can jump back to any of the, in fact, I'm going to do that. I'll just jump back here to kind of our current scenario of where we are here. The issue and the direction that I need from council as we put together the final spending plan is what's council's appetite. I will say this, a $5 million reduction in the general fund or a $7 million if council says don't raise any revenue, just cut it completely. A $7 million reduction in the general fund in order to put in $2 million in fund balance would be significant. To put it into perspective, if you took the council's pay, the manager's office and all the employees there, the legal department, the finance department, the IS department, the clerk's office, the treasurer's office, and then our human resources department, that all adds up to about $4.2 million in salaries. So that doesn't even come, that's 8 departments, and that doesn't even come close to covering that shortfall that we're facing. So some direction, I think, as we finalize this spending plan from council would be appreciated, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. When we met down at the Riverfront Museum a couple weeks ago, pretty much to attempt to do what we're attempting to do tonight was, and we kind of got bogged down, but it's in blue and gray and red here. So we have to address $5 million next year, and $2 more million for PAG. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's just the black and white of it, and then we need to figure out how we're going to pay for it. That's what a budget does. So that's what we need to come up with. How are we going to come up with it? We need to give the city manager direction. Is it going to come? And he just explained what it means if we don't give him any revenues, and if that's the direction, he'll come back to us next week with what will amount to $7 million in reductions in our operations. So we need to know, A, I think it was basically 3 questions. Are we going to try to fund the fund balance at the $2 million that we talked about a couple weeks ago? And then how are we going to fund the deficit? Anybody want to take a whack at that? Councilman Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get started with the packaged liquor tax. If you could, just for everybody's clarity, discuss the difference between that and, going in and buying a bottle of beer at a bar and what this means to everybody.
By a packaged liquor tax, what we mean is when you're buying alcohol for home consumption. So you're going into a liquor store and you're purchasing something that you're going to take home and consume at home. And so this would be a tax that would be set up and charged on those home purchases. This would not be charged on if you were to go down to the corner bar and have a beer. That would not be where that fee would be or tax would be implemented.
So, differences between the taxes that are being paid when someone goes into a bar currently versus buying packaged liquor. I assume there's some type of tax on each.
There is, and you have sales taxes, and then you have when you're at a restaurant, you're also paying the restaurant tax that's on that portion there. So that's the difference, is the sales tax portion versus the restaurant tax portion.
So this would make it probably closer in number to what you would be paying if you were paying a restaurant tax.
I think as we've looked at that in the past, that's one of the ways we've looked at how that might level that out.
Well, I would support moving forward with this one.
Anybody else on this? The argument that's always come up in the past from the retailers is the advantage or disadvantage that they would be at when the communities outside the city of Peoria did not have that. Does this contemplate 2% or 1%? 2%? 2%. Just for past discussion. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, for clarity, would this impact the liquor that's served at our various catering facilities? They've got to buy it somewhere.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. If a catering business, I think that normally they're buying it from a distributor and then selling it as a caterer. It's not retail purchasing, so I don't believe that would be subject to the tax. I'll look to the finance director for that one.
It's the blue one. Okay. If they're selling alcohol, they have to have a liquor license to sell alcohol. Under the state of Illinois, they can only buy from a wholesaler. They can't go to UFS or Hy-Vee and purchase their alcohol. They're going to have to buy it from a wholesaler if they're selling it. As if they're not selling it, I don't know. I mean, my assumption is they're selling it because they're catering it. So they would not be impacted by this tax because they should be buying it from a wholesaler anyhow.
In the event that they've had a great week and they've run out of something, and the wholesaler can't get it to them in time, and they can't go over to UFS and get it.
No drinking establishment with a liquor license is supposed to do that.
Okay.
If they get caught, they will be fined and should have their license pulled by the state of Illinois.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we've got a lot of catering companies out here, and just wanted to make sure there was no unintended consequences. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Regenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I remember previous discussions on this, and I think it's probably worth getting a little more information on, but I know there's a lot of unintended consequences that will be brought to our attention here in the next couple weeks as we process this. And it's ironic to me that we get accused of our Miller fuel tax, for instance, is a nickel now, and you'll see gas prices in other communities well lower than in the city. So sometimes it has nothing to do with what the tax rate is. It's just the supply and demand of economics in the marketplace. So I just want everybody to know that the votes we're taking now, this isn't any final decision on any of this, that these are things we need to contemplate as we're looking to plug these holes. And I can only imagine what some of the marketing is going to be like along War Memorial, where that Peoria Heights line divides and the 2-cent tax goes away. So just some thoughts that we need to keep in mind as we go through this process. Thank you.
The only thing I want to add to that is Councilmember Regenbach is correct. There's no final decisions tonight, but these are going to be made in the forms of motions and seconds because the manager needs to know if there's consensus supporting them or not. That's the only way we're going to get anywhere tonight. So we can have further questions, or if the motion passes, I would assume that we would bring back more information as Councilman Regenbach talks about. But if the motion fails, then we're on to the next thing. So if we want to put this in the form of a motion, Councilman Euler moves to look towards raising the packaged liquor tax by 2%. Is there a second for that motion? That was seconded by Councilmember Akeson. So it's discussion on the question of whether you would potentially support a packaged liquor tax or not. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes with 7 ayes and 2 noes. Voting no, Mayor Artis and Councilmember Sear. That provides direction. Thank you. Anyone else? Let me do this. Get on now? Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Artis, or Mayor Artis, I'm sorry. I have a couple questions for the city manager related to our revenue options. One, I know you did provide a report back on my request to analyze, I don't know what the number was, looking at cutting salaries by $10,000 at different levels for employees. And, you know, I appreciate your opinion in this and your report back, but there aren't really any numbers in here. So I'm wondering if we're going to be able to get that. I understand the whole issue with having to negotiate with the unions. So part of my request is I wanted to know how many management employees we have and what the cost savings would be if we were to set a level for anyone making over $100,000 if we reduce their salaries by $10,000, and what that cost savings would be. And then again, if we did it at another level at like $70,000. And I don't know if you know here for purposes of discussion what that ballpark figure would be, at least for the number of employees.
I don't know offhand on the number of employees, but we can certainly get that back for you and elaborate a little bit further on this. I think that there's some of the practical challenges of that is that you have some people that are in management positions that their final rate of pay determines their pensions.
Right.
And I'm speaking specifically of police and fire. And any reduction in that has an impact on that, and they make the determination that it's time to retire if they wanted to do that. The same with management employees. If council wanted to direct us to go forward with a 10% reduction across the board with managers' pay, we could certainly look at what that would do. I think that's something that if we got that direction, we could proceed with. But it would, I think it would be a challenge in terms of implementing that. Now, as you get lower into the organization, now we have collective bargaining agreements, right, where it will become more difficult to negotiate anything without some sort of request from the unions for something else right, in consideration for that. And so all told, we're looking at, we've probably got about $66 million of personal services costs. So that, and wages costs.
Can you say that again? What was that?
66 million, roughly.
Right.
Okay, so taking, even if you said we're going to do a 10% across the board, you're talking about 6.6 million, but it's not likely that that's going to happen. The lever you control is the number of employees that you employ as city employees. That's the lever that you control.
Well, and I understand your point. I don't know whether or not I want to make a motion to move forward with this because I need to see what the numbers are. So I would like, if you could get that to us.
Sure.
in the next, I know time is short.
Turn it around in the next week. We'll be happy. We can turn around for you.
Okay. Can I then address another issue? With regards to the motor vehicle registration fee, which everybody seems to think is my favorite topic, but it really isn't. When I first proposed this, the proposal that I had made was to do this rather than raise property taxes to pay for additional road work. So my question for the city manager is, if we were to implement this, I mean, I see what you're saying, it'll be about $1 million in revenue after you reduce the expenses. Can we mark that for just road work and then shift some of the money that we already have in our capital, in our proposed capital budget, and put that to the general fund?
You could certainly do that with the property tax that we're levying as part of the debt. I think that because we're taking $2 million a year and levying property taxes that were supported for debt and then transferring that into the road funds. So, or reducing the transfer that would go into the debt fund. So I think that we could do, but I'm not sure that. I think yes, up to. I think that we probably.
I mean, currently we do about $1.2 million for roads that we levy on the property tax bill. So if you move that 1.2 to the general fund and replace the other with the fee, you could go that direction too.
No, we're kind of talking through it
Moving
here.
the
I think it's doable. I think it is something that we could do because we're also levying $2 million in property taxes to pay part of our debt service costs. And that $2 million we did instead of taking money out of the general fund. And then we put that money into roads. So I think that portion, yes, we could.
Okay, so I guess, and I don't know if I'm ready to make a motion on this, but I would be in favor of doing that if it could be handled that way. And then we would eventually, when we hopefully get out of this hole in these bad budgets, we would have at least a dedicated road fund based on whatever revenue comes in from that motor vehicle fee. So that makes sense to me. And I don't know if any other council people want to comment on that. So those are my 2 points and questions on revenue at this point.
I think what you need to do is put a motion out there to look at to utilize the motor vehicle tax under the scenario that you presented.
Okay. So
just to see if he has the direction to move forward or not.
I so move.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Akeson. Discussion on this motion. I have a couple lights, but is this on this motion? Councilman Rodrigo.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate this idea coming back. It definitely could look like a possible revenue source if and when everything works out correctly. I think just in our previous discussions, we've shown that sometimes the city doesn't have maybe always the capability of always going through the collection process that we sometimes think we can. I think we've seen that in our fine and fee department as well. But I think what really concerns me on this is the possibility of what it may appear or be perceived as a reason to pull over certain vehicles in looking for a vehicle sticker to see if they would be required to have one within the city. And so that's where my consternation is on this, because I don't know the ramifications on it. We're asking the police to already do a lot of things, and now we're going to have them start to police the vehicles, and it's one more reason to have them maybe have an interaction with a vehicle that might not need one. Plus, I guess I'm trying to figure out how this works with us in such close proximities with other communities. To somebody who lives across the river but they work here, they've got to get a sticker, or what those qualifications are. So until I had a little bit more information, I would not be able to support it, but I definitely appreciate the offer coming back.
Okay, I have Councilmember Moore.
Mr. City Manager, would this be something tagging on to Councilman Rico's comment, like a city sticker that you see on some people's cars in some communities?
Yes.
Okay. So my parents have a city sticker where they live in the south suburbs of Chicago. They have to have a city sticker on each car. And so if you have 2 or 3 cars in your household, or 4 or 5 cars in your household, you would be paying $30 per car. And so this would also impact, I don't know for sure, would this also fall upon car dealerships who have vehicles?
No, this is just the personal vehicles that the residents of the city of Peoria own.
So I've said each time this comes up, I cannot support this type of city sticker registration because it definitely will impact those who can least afford to have this kind of thing. Those who may have cars for their kids, whether they live in the 5th district with kids or the 1st district with kids, if you have 2 or 3 kids who are driving cars in your household, then that's a big hit. If you've got 1 or 2 cars, it's a big hit. So imagine if you've got 4 cars. And then the problem of determining who do you pull over, because we live right on the river, and our boundaries are so easily broached that someone who lives in Chillicothe could be pulled over. Someone who lives in Peoria Heights could be pulled over because we don't know where they live. So how would we determine who to pull over? Finally, we talked about our officers. We had a discussion some weeks or months ago that we're pretty much not pulling over anybody for anything anyway. So perhaps that wouldn't happen. I think we have a team of 5 traffic police officers in addition to 6 traffic officers. And how many supervisors of traffic? Does that include the supervisors? 1 sergeant, but they're not on patrol. So we have 6 on patrol. And the last time we talked about this, there wasn't a lot of traffic happening, and maybe there is now, but when we last had this discussion, our traffic officers were doing other things besides traffic. So this is not something I can support because of primarily who it's going to impact the most. So, in my household, okay, so sure, we have another $60. Somebody else's, my neighbor's household, they're going to be hit by another $120. And they're already coming over to talk to me about the stormwater utility bill that they just got. And they're already talking to me about every year their trash is going up. And they're already talking to me about the CSO that's coming. And then now this whole discussion about the water, they're talking to me about for 25 years how much more they're going to have to pay on top of their water bill. And so this is something I think is something that we don't have to shoot ourselves on. So I will not be supporting this item.
Yeah. I have Councilmember Riggenbach and then Councilmember Akeson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Jensen, if I can address her directly, was your motion isn't to shift the funds and all that stuff you were talking about, or was that a condition for this?
It's to move.
Because I was one of the guys that supported the previous changes that I consider we have a dedicated stream for road repair with the property tax levy and the part of the hotel tax. So I don't want to go back on the word I gave to people in 2015 when I voted for that and say, oh, then that's going to be the whole accusation about the lottery, well, you're using this money for schools, so we're still using the same money, but it's just coming from a different pot. I'm very curious about the motor vehicle fee. I understand all the concerns, but I know it's been done in hundreds of other cities, so I think it could be doable, but I don't want to go down the road now of saying that all the revenue streams we made for roads 3 years ago are going to be replaced by this. That complicates it for me.
Why I made that part of it, that part of this is because it's my understanding that isn't really a dedicated road fund. the way we have it set up right now. And
The 1.2, the additional local motor fuel tax is a dedicated road fund. Those can only be spent on roads. The areas where we have some flexibility would be the $800,000 that we're taking out of hotel taxes and transferring that for roads, and then the $2 million that we're taking out of bonds and transferring that into roads. Those are our two areas, because what we're doing is we're levying. Every year we adopt an abatement ordinance that says we're not going to levy property taxes for our debt. 3 years ago, we decided we're going to levy $2 million for our debt. The $2 million that we would have had other revenues for, instead of that going to pay debt, that's going to pay for road work. That portion could be switched to where you now have the motor vehicle registration revenues, and then $1 million stays in the general fund to fund operations, and another $1 million then gets transferred in to cover roads. That, which I think was the intent that you were looking at, right? Okay.
To make it any more complicated than it already is, and just Henniger's description, it's quite a formula and a recipe, if you will. But I would be willing to support exploring this if there weren't as many strings attached. So okay. I don't want to go down that path right now.
Okay.
Because you're just.
Councilmember Akeson.
Thank you. When we first brought this up, was it 2 years ago? How long ago it was? 3? Councilwoman Jensen and I both talked about this, and it was really the idea that we could do a reduced version of what the Chicago City Vehicle Sticker Program is, and they actually require anyone who uses a car in the city of Chicago, even when it's registered outside of the city of Chicago. So they're able to really generate quite a bit of revenue using this program, and you know, their stickers are over $100 a piece. And my experience is that they don't pull people over at all for a sticker violation. It's more enforced like a parking violation would be. So if it's recognized you don't have a sticker, then you would get like a parking violation. It's not a moving violation. And maybe what could come back is a little bit more description as to how this is, how this works in other cities. And, it's unfortunate that we're in a situation, I think no matter what column we fall down on, it's going to be a hardship for people. We're either going to have to reduce employees, which will be a significant hardship for the employees that no longer have a job here. If we come down on another fee, it's going to be it's going to be a burden on everyone who already believes their taxes and fees and every other way that we extract discretionary income from, the people that live in our city. I mean, we can't avoid the conversation. We either have to raise revenue or decrease expenditures. And I think that the road issue is a significant one, and I think the vehicle sticker idea is sound in the sense that using a car on our streets, and maybe we could even, consider some higher fee for trucks, since they also create a lot of issues for our roadways and our curbs. So I think it's a very sound idea. But to alleviate people's concerns about the moving violation, I don't believe that that's the way that it's enforced, and maybe the city manager or the interim police chief could come back with some more information about that.
We'd be happy to, and I think we'll pull the Chicago ordinance and give you a report back on that as well.
Councilman Graham.
Well, I, of course, did not support the furloughs. I think we need to take a look at whatever budget we adopt, the impact it has on public safety. And so if we're not interested in supporting enhancements of revenue, then we need to tell the people which firehouses we're going to close, what number of police officers are going to be laid off, how many road projects aren't going to be done, how many people in public works are going to be laid off. And so we can do all these other things, throwing the ball over here so we're not looking here. The final analysis, if we really care about the people of Peoria, we don't continue to cut our employees. We shouldn't have in the first place. When I try to provide service for the people of the 2nd District, and I send an email out and it says, I can't talk to this person for 2 or 3 days because they're just plain out of the loop. I may not do so because they're on furlough. Don't think for 1 minute that doesn't impact the operation of the city. And then if we, and that's just a mini version. Then if we go ahead and cut all these positions to come up with $5 million, you better be ready to explain why the police officer is not there. And you better be able to explain why the firehouse is closed or why we're not enforcing the chronic aggravated nuisance ordinance. Because that's, really if you care about our city, then you care about our employees and keeping them employed. We have cut how many hundreds of jobs, manager, over the past 6 or 7 years?
In the last decade, it's been about 125 positions.
125. And that's out of how many?
Well, I think we're down now to about 660 employees total.
So then, if we were to find, I went through this exercise with Director Scroggins, 6 million, maybe 2.5 firehouses. 6 million might be 36 police officers. 6 million, well, we can figure out how many public works positions that would be when the snow starts to fly and everybody needs the roads cleared, just so they don't have an accident, not to mention being able to get out of their neighborhoods. Councilor Jensen and Councilor Akeson, when you brought this up some time ago, I think one of the reasons it didn't fly was we had many mechanical questions about how it would operate. And my understanding at the time, and Manager, I know you're going to provide a report back on this, would be that we would be working through the DMV to ensure that people living in our city were paying what was appropriate. Was there not a nexus to our DMV?
We've talked with them about trying to get a handle on the number of vehicles, and they have it on a countywide basis, but they don't have that data on how many vehicles are in the city. And we've utilized that to kind of extrapolate what that number might be here inside the city's boundaries. That's what we've been able to do, and what the DMV has been willing to provide for us so far.
So if you don't want to support this, and it leads to some of these draconian cuts that I just identified, that's fine. Or maybe you have some other revenue source that really amounts to something. I think that, if somebody's got 4 cars, I heard somebody say, well, gee, what would they pay if they had 4 cars? Well, they have 4 cars. They can afford to pay it. So, yeah, I'm going to support the motion to look at this as a revenue source. Thank you.
Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate outside of the box new ideas here, so certainly don't want to turn anyone away from that. However, I think with the community outrage right now over the stormwater fee and the fact that we haven't even finished implementing that, this would be a real shockwave to the community that I don't think we're ready for, so I can't support it at this time.
Councilmember Akeson.
Just one more aspect of this. This might be a way for us to capture some revenue from people that operate their cars in the city but don't live here, and use our roadways and use our services, but they don't they don't have any responsibility for the burden because they live in another community. It's just, and I don't know how this would actually, because the city manager and I had some conversation back and forth today about this, how we would actually execute, and I'm sure the first year it might be a little rocky, but, over time it probably turns out that people understand that they need to have a city sticker, and maybe the number isn't 30. Maybe the numbers of, I would suspect that the average number of cars per household is greater than 1.5. So maybe with a little bit more focus, we could get a more realistic idea of what the number would be, and you could reduce the amount of the sticker. It's just a one way for us to capture, revenue to handle the expenses from people that don't live in the city but use our city services.
I cannot figure out how we would possibly require or how we would monitor cars that are using our city streets that don't live here. I mean, number one, yeah, we probably should, but I mean, I go to Chicago all the time and I've never had a vehicle sticker. I don't know anybody that's been to Chicago that got pulled over and got a ticket for not having a vehicle sticker. Okay, all I'm saying is, to me, it sounds like an unbelievable thing to try to regulate, and number two, it sounds like a recipe to ask people not to drive in our town. I'm just saying.
Okay.
So, but we'll see how the vote comes out. Yeah. Anybody else on this? We have a motion and a second. And this is just to go down the road of motor vehicle sticker and the other options of potentially related to people that don't live here. We have a motion and a second. Seeing no lights, Councilman Graham.
Well, one thing now. There are mechanical issues that would need to be worked out on it. By supporting this doesn't mean we're implementing it. It means we're getting more facts back from our management based on the queries that have been made tonight. So I'm not saying after we get all the information back, I don't think Councilor Jensen or Akeson are saying that we're automatically supporting this until we get more information, but I think it's a fairly innocuous revenue stream compared to some of the other things we can do. And I sure as hell don't want to tell people about fire station closing or cutting 18 officers or some hybrid mix of that 5 or 6 million we were talking about. We've cut the city to the bone. So I think that's what we're voting for, getting more facts on it. Thank you.
Okay. Now there's no further lights. Please cast your ballots. That motion fails. 3 yeses, 6 noes. Voting yes, Council members Akeson, Graham, and Jensen. Councilman Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Move to remove other revenue option, public safety pension fee, in the situation we're in right now with the stormwater utility fee. I can't even imagine doing this. So I'd like to make a motion to remove that idea.
Motion to remove the
public safety pension fee. The Danville case.
To remove that, okay. And that was seconded by Councilman Euler. Discussion on this idea. The only positive that I would see to this is, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Manager, this would be itemized on the tax bill.
Well, and I think that's something we'd have to work out with the Treasurer's Office, if this is something that we could put on as an itemization on the property tax bill, or if we'd have to look at sending this under a separate bill. We have not had that follow-up conversation with Danville to see how they're billing this, and we have non-ad valorem items that are billed on the property tax bill now, the garbage bill. So it is possible that could end up there. But
my point
if it can't be, then it's not. That's the challenge.
My point is, we're paying the majority of these dollars on our property taxes are to pay our pensions. And if we were able to itemize and say whatever this fee was is going directly to help us offset those pensions, at least people understand what it's going for. As the manager said, on 48,000 parcels, if we did $50, it would be $2.4 million. That's almost half of where we're going to be next year. And we're there next year because of the pensions. So there's a direct correlation. I don't like it, but I do like the opportunity to say, you're paying, whether it's $50 or 100. If it's 100, you're talking, 4.8. And then we're there. I'm not saying that's what we want to do, but for $100 per parcel, and that's everybody. That's tax exempt. That's every parcel in the city. I'm going to make sure I get that motion. It was Councilman Sear and seconded by Councilman Euler. Okay. I have a number of lights here. Councilman Sear, you made the motion, so you go first.
I didn't hear you, sir.
You're up. I'll turn it on. Ready? Go.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
The timing is just horrible. Again, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, but with we're just talking about, we just increased the garbage tax or the garbage fee from $13 to $17. It's probably going to go up the next few years to $18, $19, $20. Now we got the stormwater utility fee. I mean, we have a lot of people that are in fixed income in our city that I just can't imagine. I mean, how we can keep on raising any fees or any taxes until, just to use my neighbors, Mr. Councilman Graham saying a few weeks ago, he's talking about we can't put a skeleton in a diet. I'm telling you, there's a lot of fat in our budget. I know there is. We talked about it, and I've made the city manager some suggestions about some of the cuts we can make. Also, I can't speak. I'm not sure if I can speak for all of us, but just a few weeks ago, we were all very embarrassed by the fact that we didn't even know who owes the city some money. And I know we're going through some different software, accounting software, and to get better. But for me, if anybody in this room ever put a budget together, the first thing you looked at is your paycheck, your revenues. And the fact that we're not sure exactly of our ability to forecast revenues, this is where I want to start. I mean, let's start talking about our revenue. If we're going to put a budget together, the first thing that everybody that I know that has a budget talks about their revenue first, their paycheck. What's our paycheck? Then we're going to start looking at our expenses and where we spend the money. If I look at one of the reports we received the last 2 years in 2016, year 2016 and 17, we did very well at forecasting our expenses, but the revenues 2 years ago were off by 2.7%. Last year, our revenue were off by 6.8%. So my suggestion or recommendation would be let's see if we can do a better job at forecasting our revenues before we start any types of other plan to raise taxes or any type of ideas to raise revenues. Because in the 5th District, I mean, you all heard me say that before. I mean, people will vote with their boots. And if we're getting too high and people cannot afford to stay here anymore, people that have the money to leave will just leave. We'll keep on. And we all know it's been happening every year. So I suggest we be very, very careful before coming up with ideas. We need a lot more discussions on make sure we can be better at forecasting our revenues first, and then we can look at other ideas as far as if we need to cut expenses. So that's all I got to say about this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Moore.
While we're there, and I think it was a study that said over the last 10 years, Peoria's lost, was it 1,000 or 1,200 people? And so the more people who vote with their feet and leave the city, the fewer people that will be around to pay the taxes and fees. And so we get the privilege of paying more because folks are leaving town. But my question is to the city manager, I hesitate to ask this for fear that someone is thinking I'm suggesting this, but I'm asking a question. Do we have the option of delaying our pension payments in any way?
Well, I think that yes, you could reduce the amount that you're contributing, but the law has changed, and the law has changed to say that if we're not funding at the level that is actuarially required, and we do that through the Department of Insurance's calculations, that the pension boards can make a claim on the revenues that the city has, and then the comptroller can sweep or withhold those funds back from the city and send them directly to the pension boards. So, yes, you could, but you do so with great peril. There is no easy answer when it comes to this pension issue that we're dealing with.
And so we are funding, I believe you said, at 90%?
The goal is, the statutory funding level is 90% funded by the year 2040 is what we need to fund to. And so as the state has done, the Department of Insurance has done their actuarial projections, what they've said is that next year, instead of an 8% increase, which is what we had budgeted, it needs to be a 15% increase in order to start to move to make the payments. Because one, they reduced the interest rate that they think, or the return on investment that the funds are making, because they're not meeting it. Two, and so they're trying to be more conservative. Well, if they're not making it as a pension board, the only place that gets made up is by the taxpayer. The taxpayer then has to make that up, and then it's your job as the council to figure out how to recommend that. What this plan lays out here is that we're not using property taxes to do that, so that's why we're having to take money out of the general fund. It's saying we're using other revenues that we have to fund public safety pensions. This is all what's driving this big hole in the budget. It's not I mean, if you take out that pension growth over time, we have other issues then that we have to deal with, but it's not nearly as significant as what we're facing. And granted, the PAG is a $2 million hit this year. It's the worst possible time we could have that is while we're dealing with this other issues. But that ramp that we have on public safety pension costs does not stop. It will continue to grow, not only this year, but for the next 30 years based upon the actuary studies that were performed by the pension board.
Do anything with the suggestion that came from the fire union about the other revenue sources? And what I'm specifically asking about, if we had a presentation that indicated, what was it, 4% of what our firefighters do is fighting fires,
Correct.
Something like that, and the other 96% is something else?
Correct. So we did raise hazmat fees last year as part of the budget. That was done. And I think I don't know, Director, if you've looked at the fire revenues that have come in to date, they've been, my last look at it, they were coming in on a pretty good clip in terms of where we had anticipated they would be coming in. The chief has approached me about looking at doing some third-party billing. I told him to go ahead and to proceed with getting an RFP out on the street to do that. So that's something that we're going to look at to see what we can do on that front as well. So we are looking at what we can do on that side of the ledger to look at that. But you did some of that last year when you made some adjustments to the fire fees as part of the budget compromise.
I think we're still missing some of the other suggestions that came with billing insurance companies for when we have to roll our rescue engine, for example. Like I said, we pretty much fight fires. We got that fire thing covered. But what we don't have covered is these other things that our firefighters are doing that we're not receiving, I believe, the adequate compensation for. And I think we're missing something if we're not more vigorously going down that road.
Well, and again, I think that looking at the model that the chief brought to my attention from Naperville is they went out and did a competitive bidding process to select somebody, and I've told them to go forward with that to start that process. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Jensen next.
I guess I've got a question for the city manager. If we do not move forward with any of these revenue options, then we're stuck either raising property taxes.
Well, I think that there's still, I think I need direction from council on where you want to go with property taxes. And then, if there's no revenue sources, or at least we have one with the packaged liquor, if there's no other revenue sources the council wants to proceed with, then we'll come back to you with a budget that looks at what those cuts would look like in order to balance the budget and what that would mean. Because as I think Councilwoman Akison said, it's either expense reductions or revenue increases.
But I mean, under your three scenarios that are part of this PowerPoint, I mean, the only one without property tax increases is reducing $23.1 million in services by 2023.
Correct.
Which would be what, at least $7 million for this coming budget?
It would be at least $7 million for this budget.
And you just said that if you were to cut 8 departments, that would be $4.2 million only.
Correct.
So I guess so I'm a little bit frustrated. I think that we should look at this public safety pension fee, because that is $2.2 million. I understand that the public, doesn't want us to be adding more fees with our stormwater utility fee and the raise in the garbage taxes, but like Councilman Grab keeps pointing out, we have cut 125 positions in 10 years. And I keep trying to throw out things creatively that are outside of the box, so we don't have to raise taxes, so we don't have to raise fees, but so we don't have to cut more services. So I think I'll be voting against Councilman Sears' motion, because I think that this public safety pension fee is something that we should look further into. For if $50 fee, we could raise $2.2 million, and it would be on the tax bill showing that it's to pay for the pensions, because that's our biggest cost. It's how much of our operating budget? Our general fund is it 80% or more? 90? How much is our pensions?
The pensions are for public safety next year will be about $21.7 million, I think is what we're looking at. So I mean that's a quarter of your general fund right there. So of the operating side.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have Councilmember Grabe next.
Mayor, I think you're right. This is a huge hunk, a huge revenue source to automatically slice off. And unless we had another blueprint that was being provided the same time we were suggesting that we remove this, I can't acquiesce in supporting a removal of such a large amount of money. I don't think people are leaving Peoria because of what they're having to pay in terms of taxes. I think they're leaving because they think we're not taking care of business in their neighborhoods, like quality of life issues, public safety, the condition of our schools. Those are the real reasons. Councilman Sandberg sat here night after night, and he pointed out, the people aren't going to object too much if they feel value for their city and what's being provided with their tax dollars. And I still think he was right. For years, he occupied the 2nd District seat, and he made many, many points that were absolutely right on target. I certainly don't want to see some of the things that we've done. We know that the hotel thing was a mess and so on and so forth. But, you know, I've been around long enough to know what would happen if we continue this cutting with the condition our city is in now. We're just beginning to rebound and resurge. And years ago, when I had District 150 programs north of War Drive out at Richwoods High School, when I would have to call very occasionally for assistance because there'd be a problem at the school, I was frequently told, you know, Councilman, you have no idea how few police officers we have north of War Drive. You have no idea. And routinely so. It's almost shocking if there is an emergency out there. For years, there was one guy. I won't mention his name. He's retired, and he said, it's unbelievable. So, you know, we need to think about the consequences of removing a huge hunk of money like this from the table unless we have some alternative sources of what it's going to do to our city and to the services we provide. We're not different than any other community. Our number one expense is going to be people. That's what it is for all of our school systems, our public school systems. This shouldn't be something that's new to us. And the idea that we would somehow refrain from, and I'm not criticizing anybody here, but the reason we have this pension mess is because years ago they didn't want to fund it. They kept raiding the pension box. And now they're trying to scapegoat retirees and saying because of the retirees, you know, we're not going to have enough money for policing and everything else because of you terrible retirees. And we have had all the political shenanigans in Springfield on both sides of the aisle. So no, we can't kick the can down the road anymore. I would say this, and I always try to end it with a positive note. Manager Urick, I know our state lawmakers are working very hard, and we have an election coming up in a few weeks, to ensure that the cities get some relief on this pension aspect. It's huge, and Councilman Sear's right when he points this out. It is huge, and it's been huge. The mayor has pointed it out. We all know it for years. They need to do something to reduce some of our obligations. The folks down in Springfield have laid, I don't know how many crosses to bear on our backs now over the past few years. And you know, the nice thing is most of our Central Illinois delegation people, Republican and Democrat, realize this. They're trying to come up with a fix. So it's possible that we could get a fix that would alleviate some of the stress municipal budgets are experiencing all across the state. It's not just Peoria. So we should hope that that happens, but in the meantime, we have to plan for a worst case scenario. We can't rely on that. So remember, every time you remove a revenue source from the table, you're inevitably leading this city down the road of where we went after the Great Recession hit in 2008, cutting firemen, police officers, code enforcement, building inspections. Now you better think about what that's doing to your neighborhoods and people wanting to live in the city. Think about it. Thank you.
Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Ms. City Manager, I just want to make sure that I was clear and that I was asking for you to come back with what that would bring to the budget.
Sure.
Okay, that's all I wanted to make clarity on. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm seeing no more lights. The motion is to not accept this potential revenue stream. So a yes vote means we're not going to accept it. A no vote means we're going to take a look at it. And again, nobody's looking at liking fees here, but be able to identifying a specific revenue stream that will go directly to paying the pensions, which is the problem that we have here, is what this could potentially do. And it would affect, and it would affect every parcel in the city, not just residential and business owners. So 48,000 parcels. A $50 fee would be about 2.4 million. A $100 fee would be double that, 4.8 towards the 5 million. Councilman Ruckriegel.
Just one last question. Thank you, Mayor. City Manager Yerk, what you're proposing here, and I guess just so that I know, is really we're going to back, what you're proposing is to back those dollars out of the general fund, and then we're automatically going to spend that same amount that we just relieved from the general fund. So it's dollar for dollar. So by doing this, we're not going to even do any cuts that might minimize that, maybe 30% down. Is that correct? Or is this really a dollar for dollar?
What it would do is it would reduce the transfer out, right? Because you would have that revenue that would be dedicated towards paying the pensions, and it would reduce the transfer number, which would ultimately reduce the deficit that we have in the general fund.
But in that exchange as well, for doing something like this, you're not proposing at the same time some cuts on the other side that would at least alleviate some of that other.
2.2 million doesn't close the $7 million gap. So ultimately, as we're working through the revenues, the question becomes, how much do you want us to cut in the general fund? And that's some of the direction I need as well, is if this is all the appetite is for revenue and you say stop, then the rest is going to come from expense reductions.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we know that it'd be pretty unrealistic to find $7 million within the operations. And that's all we're trying to do is give him some flexibility on how big that number is going to be. So we have a motion not to approve this, not to approve the public safety pension fee option. Please cast your ballots. That motion fails with 3 ayes and 6 noes. Voting yes, Councilmember Sear, Euler, and Ruckriegel. So, Councilmember Akeson, motion to, what would your motion be?
So I make a motion to consider the parcel fee.
Of?
Do we need to make a
Well, I guess
number?
we could put it in there with 2 options. We could put it in there.
I would suggest both options, yes.
Okay. So the motion is to consider the public safety pension fee at 50 and 100. Is there a second? Councilman Regenbach. Discussion. Councilman Greb.
This by no means states that the people who voted the other way should not have an opportunity to bring our next meeting some other revenue sources forward. So, if the thought is there's some better ways of doing this, bring them forward. 3 green lights, bring them forward. We want to see them. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your ballots. That motion passes with 6 ayes, 3 noes. Voting no, Councilmembers Sear, Euler, and Ruckriegel. Any other options for council discussion? We had I don't know if there was a report back on the business registration. I don't know if you wanted to do anything with that.
Do you want me to talk about that? So I do think that we need to move forward with establishing a business registration. I think that the question is the fee that we charge, whether it should be no fee or a fee, determine a fee just to cover the cost of establishing it. But I think there's so many benefits associated with bringing a business registration to the city of Peoria that we really need to be considering that right now.
Okay.
So I would move to bring forward the process that we would start to initiate a business registration fee, including timing, cost, and whether a fee would be necessary.
And that motion was seconded by Councilman Jensen. Mr. Manager, did you have a? No, okay.
Thank you. Great direction.
Okay. I can. Sorry about that. Councilman Willer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity, are we proposing process of business registration or also a fee with it? Okay.
Which is my original request.
Okay. Councilmember Regenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is an intriguing idea, and I liked the idea of it a year ago when we talked about it, but my concern right now goes back to stormwater utility fee and some of the things we've talked about previously, and I'm just, this one kind of concerns me, and I guess I think there should be some dialogue with the chamber and other business groups to see if there's already some of this information available, because if we do it with no fee, we're actually adding to the expense side of our ledger, and we're going to need to find staff and money to do it. And if we do it with a fee, I'm just not prepared at this point to support a fee on the businesses. Thank you.
Councilman Higginson.
We're not voting on whether to do it or not. We're voting about bringing back more information so we understand exactly what it is we will be requesting of businesses. And it's for the business's benefit. It's for the city's benefit. It's the way for us to start formalizing a way for us to communicate. And we've already had several discussions around the horseshoe, frustrating council members that we can't establish business associations. We have a hard time contacting people in a certain district. It's incredibly beneficial, and we need to see it written down on paper what it actually is going to mean, and it may include reaching out to the business community to help to have them help us figure out the best way to execute.
So this, we're not necessarily looking at this as a revenue stream at this point.
It might be, it could be. I don't think that was my initial intent when I brought it forward. I think it's a very important tool for us to have to start gathering information and data.
Okay. I had Councilman Rockriegel next.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, we really have to start focusing on our priorities on the budget. And it means getting back to the business of the budget. I love this idea, and I think I've talked to one of my council members before on it, and there's some great value possibly, but with all of the things in front of us, I can tell you in 30 years of business, I never have once said, and I have paid some business registration fees in some cities, that it helped me out. Right now, in the minute, there may be reason and value long term, but again, we're going to take staff time to develop something which may or may not really produce a big revenue source, and it's going to frustrate businesses because it's one more thing, the stormwater fee, we're going to add this fee. We've got the Secretary of State that we can get a list of LLCs and businesses that are incorporated within the state. Very simple. It's a great conversation. They're very happy to help out with that. We've got the chamber. It might even help the chamber do whatever they naturally do, which is try to find other members. And there may be value in the long term, but this is where we start to go awry. We've got a major budget happening in front of us, and we want to come back with one more reason to tax a business. It is a tax, call it a fee, call it whatever you want to, but if you don't think, and you know, make it $20, $30, make it $100, fees never go down. Very rarely does the city ever reduce. I think with the landlord registration may have been one of the few that would ever be reduced. It doesn't happen because once you feed the beast, he has to keep getting fed, and that means raise it more, raise it more, raise it more. This isn't going to be a big revenue source. So for me, it's just not the time to come back in a couple of years when our budget is in a much better place where we can spend some staff time. I don't say that there may not be some benefit on it, But I think right now we've got other priorities.
Okay, have Councilmember Sear next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say that I agree 100% with Councilwoman Beth Akeson about the need to do that. But here's the biggest problem right now: is the timing. I also have to agree with what Councilman Rodrigo just said. I mean, every business owner in the city of Peoria pays at least $100 fee, a yearly fee to the state right now, at least $100. Number two, 37% of our revenues from the stormwater utility fee come from businesses. 37%. I mean, I think we've penalized them enough for this year. And if you're looking for an idea, I'd like to sit down with you, Ms. Akeson, and actually to this idea to work, we would probably need to have some type of registration of businesses. But you were talking earlier about how we can tax people that comes outside the city of Peoria. I know there's opportunities. I'm sure there is opportunities with the county of Peoria. They have a balanced budget that we can increase some revenues. One of them would be for employers. Okay, employers in the city of Peoria. Okay, if they have employees that do not live in the city of Peoria, but use our roads and our services, maybe to be a way to have some type of fee for people that come from outside the city, come here and work here and use our road and all our services, but leave the city and go somewhere else. So that could be one idea for you if you want to find a way to raise some money from people that are coming to our city. But right now, I just can't support some type of additional fee for businesses to register. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm seeing no more lights here. I'm just going to tell Councilwoman Akeson publicly, I support us looking into this after the budget. I'm just telling you. In which we haven't had before. Okay, so please cast your ballots. That motion fails with 4 ayes and 5 noes. Voting yes, Council members Akeson, Grab, Jensen, and Euler. Anyone else for the manager here? Councilman Grab.
Mayor, is this a question I can ask the manager at this point?
Sure.
Manager, without getting into a legal swamp, I have to look at Donald Lice when I say that. It's conceivable that this year we will settle this lawsuit that's been directed at our city and other cities that have had the runoff problem perhaps before New Year's Day. It's conceivable.
Which lawsuit? You cut out there.
We're the CSO manager.
Oh, the CSO.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, it's conceivable that we'll reach agreement before the end of the year.
Okay. Now, it's very possible that the people will be paying more taxes thanks to this unfunded mandate from the federal government. Dick Nixon created the EPA back in the 70s. He was Republican president, just in case you want to keep track. And we still have the EPA in effect. And as far as I know, even with Donald Trump, they're still hammering us to stop this runoff. Now, since I want to be positive, even when I'm sometimes negative about things, if we have this unfunded mandate, and we've been fighting to ensure that they're fair with the people of Peoria, would it not mean that we'd have a lot of money plowed into green infrastructure if they'll accept this green model we've been pushing for, making Peoria one of the greenest cities in the country, and that would help rebuild our neighborhoods and good paying head of household jobs with that?
The intent that of the plan that we've been putting together with the federal government is that we would look at a green stormwater solution that would probably impact about a third of the rights of way inside the CSO area is what we would be looking at.
So, if it means, a legacy project, a rebuilding, oh my God, just let's take a look at 2nd District, alleys and so on. I know we have district council members who work very hard. I know they're spending at least 1,000 hours a year especially if they're district councilmen. No disparaging at-large councilmen. I used to be one. But I guarantee you, this is going to be huge. I know we've been trying to make certain that it was somewhat palatable for our people, stretching it out over a shorter period of time, reducing the amount of money that we'd have to pay to stop this runoff based on that 1949 December storm and all that. But ultimately, this could help us take some pressure off our capital budgets going forward as an unfunded mandate. Am I right or wrong on that?
Well, I mean, the challenge is we're going to be asked to spend a lot of money in a relatively short period of time to comply. It's going to mean that we're doing significant public engagement in the sewer sheds, talking about the types of projects that the community is going to want, the types of applications that might work, and then mapping out that large public works project. Some of that might have an impact on city streets. Some of it might not. It's going to depend on how that plays out. But there will definitely be in that CSO area an impact that everyone will see in terms of the types of projects we would be putting in place.
Not, glamorous to talk about it, but this community has started to rebuild. And I know it's not glamorous. Councilman Sandberg used to call core basic service. We've started to rebuild our sewer system.
That's correct.
That's huge.
Yes.
I mean, people think, well, what's that all about? Oh, yeah, it's a big deal. When you don't have rebuilt sewers that support the city and drainage, it's a big deal. It's a big deal, public health deal. It's a big deal for our homeowners. So we have to realize that there are some mixed blessings here. Because sometimes I think when I come into this chamber, it's like we're all going to get shot, that we all have to be afraid to discuss what's true. But there will be a positive impact with this, even though we tried to ensure that they wouldn't be overly punitive with us.
Correct.
And we don't want to get hit with punitive damages. So I did want to concentrate on that because that's part of our overall picture as to amounts of money that will be spent rebuilding this community, whether we like it or not. Thank you.
What are you pointing at? Councilman Euler was pointing at something else. Oh, you do have a motion to make? I didn't see your light. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't. I'd like to make a motion that we restore the general fund balance to 25% over 10 years at an equal rate per year over those 10.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. This was the item we discussed and approved to bring back to tonight's meeting at our meeting at the Riverfront Museum. So that's approximately $2 million a year, correct? Okay. Is there a discussion on this? To get us to 25%, it'll be $2 million a year. Councilman Gribb.
Councilor Euler, I want to make sure I understand this. This would bring us up to how many million over 10 years for a reserve? I couldn't quite hear what you said over here when you were.
Take it up to 25%, which is what it's set at, but do it over at a period of 10 years rather than 5, evenly spread out over those 10. So roughly $2 million a year.
To reach, that's our policy number.
So you're just restoring us to our halcyon days when we had a decent reserve. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess given our budget, and this is something that we talked about at the last meeting, and based on the report backs that we've received, I think we should look at changing our policy so it's a lower amount. I see Normal has 15%, and City of Bloomington has 10%, and City of Champaign has 10%. I think just given our budget constraints, that would make more sense at this point, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay. Councilman Ruckriegel.
Thank you.
we've had a policy for 25%, and I think for many, many years, if we look back, that policy has held us very well. Part of the policy was always to rebuild it whenever it went down. You know, there's been a couple of bad economic time frames that have faced councils before I was around this horseshoe, and I think a couple of the people who are on the council now had to face really tough decisions in those times. And I think when you look back at the percentages there, one of the things that they did was always make sure that if there was a dip in the reserves, they came back and those over some relatively close years were funded. And I think that's very admirable, because if you look in 08, when there was a 24% reserve, and we know what the economic times frame was in 08, it dipped a little bit to 17 in 09, still in 17 and in 10. But eventually by 12 and 13, they built it up. We can go back to 2000 and see that same sort of thing. So to lessen the percent, because we don't want to hold ourselves accountable to being what is a financially strengthening piece of our city. We have had our bond rating go down. We need to put ourselves on a strong financial position, not lessen the qualifications for things when we just can't make it happen. I'd rather see a slow growth. I don't think we can do it very quickly. I like the proposal over 10 years to be able to build this up there, and I think that that's a strength, and it gives us something as a community to be able to look forward to. The other thing it does do is in the next recession, and let's be honest, there is going to be a next recession, there is going to be another downturn. It's just kind of the cycle of the way things work. It gives us some reserves to where we don't have to make the tough choices we've been having to make over the past couple of years. Previous councils before us have protected the city that way, and I think we should follow suit.
Okay. I have Councilwoman Moore and then Councilman Grab.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And looking at the chart that we were provided on page 3 and where our percentages have been for the reserve fund, I'm wondering if we're trying to answer the wrong question. The reserves dipped below a certain number because we voted to use those funds for those reasons. Perhaps if I don't remember what all the selections were, and I'm sure somewhere in there I'm probably part of that reason why it is where it is. But I'm wondering if we just need to be more suspect about what we decide to go into our reserves for. You know, there's a lot of things that happen that we have no choice. You have to do it. That's it. That's all you can do. But getting at the 25%, I'm not quite sure 25% is the number we need to be at. When looking at this chart, we've done pretty well under that 25%, so it seems to suggest we don't, I mean, it's like the Cadillac. We'd love to have a Cadillac. We'd love it, be great. But my Chevy gets me around. And so I don't suggest that we don't have a reserve percentage. I'm just suggesting 25 may be too high. So I cannot support the motion to restore us back to 25. If it was restore us to something under 25, I'd be more agreeable. Thank you.
Councilman Grab, then Councilman Jensen.
Well, I'm sympathetic to both sides of this argument. I do think it would be edifying, though, Manager, for you to tell the council what would happen if a major catastrophe occurred, perhaps with our national economy, and we were impacted and we didn't have that reserve. How would we be able to fund and float the city, keep our neighborhoods going if we did not have this reserve? What alternatives would we have to use resource-wise?
One approach would be to issue tax anticipation warrants, which is basically a pledge from a financial institution that's going to put up money, and then you get paid back once your property taxes come in. We would look at that. You could look at issuing bonds for working cash purposes, which would replenish your cash reserves. but then those bonds have to be repaid back. You could levy a property tax to cover and to generate back up and replenish your reserves if that's something that the council so desires to do. So there's a couple of different options you could look at to try and replenish the reserves that we have.
So if there's a natural disaster, what's the likelihood that people are going to be able to pay higher property taxes and in the other anticipations that we're assuming under normal we're not talking about normal circumstances.
Right. I mean, and I think that's one of the concerns, and that's one of the reasons why you want to have some liquidity in your balance sheet.
Exactly. That's the right.
Well, of course, the other side of the argument is it's very logical. It's like, oh gosh, we've had to fix the roof, paint the house. The basement foundation had problems. These things needed to be addressed. While it'd be nice if we could also have a real big savings account, right now we're faced with all kinds of pressures on us. So I see merit in both arguments. Actually, I wish I weren't here right now to vote on this one. Everything else has been easy. But, yeah, we used to have, you remember, Mayor, we used to have very healthy reserves. And some of the problems that we have identified, a lot of them coming from the state and all the problems at the state level that we've had, dysfunction there, it's raining on us. So I really, you can see how I vote when I vote. So thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not, like I said, I support a fund. I just think given the situation that we're in right now, nobody's coming up with additional revenue sources, so I'm not sure how we're going to come up with $2.2 million each year to get to the 25% in 10 years. So as I indicated before, I think it should be a lower amount or over a longer period of time because we don't have $2.2 million right now. So again, I'm going to vote against this. Thank you.
I'm going to vote to support this for a number of reasons, not the least of which is we have to show the people that we're asking to help us get through this, that we're trying to be responsible with this. $2 million is not going to get us to 25%. But we need to move in that direction. Our budget or our policy, that number is approximately 90 days, Mr. Manager. Is that what that number equates to? About 90 days of operating capital. What do we have now? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? 1 week?
1 to 2.
Yeah. I mean, so that's why I'm supporting it and will be. Councilman Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at these numbers, we have run ourselves down to 2.8 in 2017. This puts back 2.2, and we've had years that we've cleaned out 6 because we missed our budget projection. So even doing this doesn't put us in a position where we can guarantee that we aren't going to completely run out of cash. So I would not at all suggest that this is too aggressive. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, Councilwoman Akeson.
I just wanted to point one thing out on this chart, on the report back, that their percent of expenditures that they currently have in their reserve is quite high, and I'm wondering if the percentage, like for instance for normal, they have in their reserve 43.7% of their expenditures in reserve, and I do believe that it's prudent for us to be as aggressive as possible. So I will support this, but when you look at these numbers, the majority of communities that surround us have quite a cushion. So that's the report back, part 1.
Page 4.
And I'm looking at it on my desk, my laptop, so.
Okay.
So it's the last column which reflects this significant cushion in normal, Champaign, even Rockford, city of Elgin. Anyway, I just asked the city manager if he knows why those numbers are so high, and he was going to get more information to us, but I think that it's evidence that they've been managing their expenses and their revenues really well.
Okay. Councilmember Rodrigo.
Along with that note, I think it's also important to like the next chart, the bond rating, because I think that there's probably a correlation between the bond rating and that as well. And a higher bond rating obviously also helps save some dollars on interest. So there is some benefit by having that reserve as well. And I think that there's an interesting correlation that just needs to be mentioned between the bond rating and the comments that were made by Councilwoman Akeson. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion before we vote? Okay. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes with 8 ayes, 1 no. Councilman Graham. Councilman Sear.
Mr. Manager, just an idea. I mean, everybody knows that gone through a real tough time, have to sell some assets at some time, whether it was for a medical bill or whatever, just to pay some bills, sell some jewelry or cars or motorcycle. What assets do we have that we could liquidate to put some money, start making or funding this account? And the main example I have for you tonight is about 6 months ago I asked for a report on our parking situation. I've never received a report yet. Do we need to be in a parking business? Can we sell those assets, basically?
We certainly could sell the assets that we have and look at divesting ourselves of them. They are revenue producing assets, so there is some revenue that could come off of those, and we could look at what that might be worth to sell. I think we could look at some other areas where we might have assets that are revenue producing to see if there's other opportunities to look at that. We'll put something together in the form of a report back and get that to you.
Thank you, because I'd really like to know what kind of income we're getting from these assets, and when we have a positive income producing asset, maybe it's a good time to sell it too. It might probably be more valuable than if we were losing money. So I just would be very interested in seeing that report. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else to bring? I think we probably do have one more question, and that's how we're going to address the PAG payment.
That would be helpful.
So, we have a $2.1 million on the PAG payment that we have to be due, and that's not included in this scenario. So, the PAG payment, the lawsuit. I mean, if there's no suggestions on that, it rolls into the deficit for next year, right?
Well, it will lead us to additional expense reductions if that's the direction that council wants us to go in. It would be
can't take it out of fund balance because we
don't have any in fund balance, so it will be expense cuts.
Okay. I'm seeing no motion on that. So you have your marching orders on what are going to be some pretty significant reductions to come back to us next week. Probably I know we ask for a lot of information, and you guys do a great job in getting all these report backs to us, but it would be helpful to get as much of this as we can
sooner, very
soon, because there's going to be a lot of community discussion about it. Mr. Manager, is there anything else you need on the budget tonight?
If that's the direction council wants to give, I think I've got my marching orders.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, wait a minute. Are these Councilman Graham and then Akeson?
Got ahead of me on this. What's the direction you feel you just got from the council?
Well, I think that the direction I have from council would be to look at the public safety pension fee, to make sure we're putting $2 million into fund balance annually and potentially look at the packaged liquor tax. So we're looking.
No, Manager, I'm sorry. I should have been clear. The direction on the PAG lawsuit. What was the direction that you?
Well, the direction on the PAG lawsuit would be that we will pay for it out of the general fund. We'll bring it forward for council to approve that payment. It will be a budget amendment that'll come forward that will require 8 votes of the council to pass it, and then we'll pay for it out of the general fund. But what it's going to necessitate is an additional $2.1 million of expense cuts in order to cover that cost.
Now, that's in this current budget cycle.
Well, it's earning interest. It's earning interest at $100 and some odd a day that we would have to do that if we were going to do it now. If we wait until the first of the year, it wouldn't require the 8 votes. It would just simply require the council to approve that payment or anticipate that in the budget we would build in that cost. So.
But if you think that you're being told to find more cuts, are we talking layoffs now?
Absolutely. There's no place this is going to come from. But
Manager, I'm glad you're telling them that before they just take us, down the primrose path. They're just authorizing, because we've been waxing eloquently about how concerned we are about those 2 or 3 people who really shouldn't have been furloughed or cut. And now we're going to give direction to cut even more jobs? Are you kidding me? I mean, schizophrenia, my gosh. So, just so you all understand what you're backing yourself into, we're talking $3 million of cuts?
It'll likely be more as we look at balancing this out.
Wonder whose firehouse that's going to be and how many police officers that's going to be.
Councilman Gribb, we've heard this speech 3 times tonight.
Well, you need to hear it again, Mayor, because it's going to impact our city. And if that's not of concern to you, it sure is to me.
It definitely is, Councilman. But if you have a way to pay for it, make the motion.
I do.
Make the motion.
It's not bringing back more cuts. Adjust fees accordingly and bring that back for us to look at. But I'm not going to back into $2.3 million of cuts. Again, I'll say it again. You're punching in the gut a skeleton, and you're impacting the neighborhoods in my district. You are really, talk about people wanting to leave Peoria. Who are these folks that take care of the people in my district? They're the city employees. This is a huge figure. This means a lot for public safety. I don't care if you don't want to hear that again. It's true. It's the truth. It's the gospel truth. So go ahead and vote for this, but then be explaining to the public why we have even more cuts and impact on quality of life in neighborhoods. And then don't talk about, why are people leaving Peoria? Because that'll tell us why.
I have Councilman Akison.
Thank you. This is probably something under new business, so I'll wait until that portion of the agenda is
This
up.
is just the budget meeting, so,
so
there's no new business tonight.
Okay. All right. That's fine then.
Okay. Councilman Weather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we were to pay the PAG lawsuit now, is the cash even there in the reserve account to do it?
It would leave us very low on funds if we tried to pay it now without reimbursing that in the next year. We'd be probably, I'm anticipating to be right around $5 million. That would put us down below $2 million or right at $2 million.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are finished with the budget discussion for this evening. Mr. Clerk, we're at citizens to address, correct? Okay. This is citizens to address the council. We have a few here. Name for the record, and we have a 5-minute limit. And up first is Helen King.
To the mayor and to the city council around the horseshoe, I didn't intend to be first. I really didn't. We've all listened to a lot of really sad news, I think. But one thing I didn't hear us talk about was the consolidated sewer overflow job that has to be done. Illinois American Water probably either offer or suggested an offer to you guys as taking over that expense. And we've kind of discussed this a little bit before. I've stood here before about this because it would be a win-win situation for the taxpayers and the city. But you know, I sit here and I listen to this and I have to think about the future of Peoria and the decisions that are being made around the horseshoe at this time will affect the population of Peoria with younger people wanting to move here. You would leave these burdens on them. And I was telling a friend of mine, I'm thinking about the haves and the have-nots. You know, all of this debt that we talked about here tonight, we don't have any jobs that could sustain tax revenue. So, you know, I'm just sitting here and I think about this city. I've been here almost 50 years now. And I love Peoria. I have a lot of good relationships here. But, you know, we think about people that just get up and walk away because I don't hear conversations of trying to bring jobs here or trying to bring a living wage job here. I don't know where we got off track. All we talk about is stuff that really doesn't matter to the livelihoods of our citizens. And so deep in my heart, I'm just asking you all to think about this water buyout thing, because if this debt is left on the next generation here, it's going to be on your backs, okay? Thank you.
Next, we have Cheryl Budzinski.
Good evening, Cheryl Budzinski, 623 West Stratford Drive, Peoria. Good evening. The League of Women Voters supports doing due diligence, and I think that's what you've been talking about. You've been talking about trying to get the numbers to see what works for the budget, and that's what doing due diligence will do. It will find out if there is a solution to have the grandkids, the great-grandkids, have a funding source through the water bills that we're all paying. It's estimated that $15 million in profit goes out of our community every year. But that's beyond. The topic I wanted to talk about came up on September 29th of 2016. We had a special committee meeting. It was a public meeting, and we were sort of surprised. The overwhelming concern was control, and it was transparency. And that's pretty much what we want. We want the financial resources, but we want to control the water resources, and we want transparency. One person at that meeting talked about a billion-dollar corporation and wondered who owned the stock in that billion-dollar corporation. That's Illinois American Water. Another talked about drought conditions in the United States and in the world. That has a potential here. There are areas, the Mohammed Aquifer, for example, which services part of Bloomington and part of Champaign. It's got a water level problem. Now, Illinois American has connected us to Dunlap, and they're in the process of connecting our water supply to Farmington because they didn't have enough water. Actually, it was this year, a bill was passed. Previously, Illinois American could take over water companies of a certain size. Well, that size was thrown out. Now Illinois American could buy Bloomington, Normal, Champagne's water systems. They could buy those, and who would be paying for that? In Farmington, they guaranteed them a low rate to continue. Let's see, kind of gotten off track, but some of the other issues that came up in that meeting were that Illinois American, if it were ever sold to another company, could possibly bottle our water and sell our water elsewhere, like what happened in Michigan with Nestle's. Our water rates have increased here by 70% over the last 13 years. 13 years. The Illinois Commerce Commission has no members that are from downstate Illinois. Our voices aren't heard. Do you think that the ICC will consider what's best for Peoria, for the low and moderate income residents of Peoria? I think you all would think about how rates and rate increases would affect them. But does the ICC do that? At another meeting this past year, Roger Goodson said at that meeting that they would have a complete assessment of our system by spring of 2018. And I'd like to see that assessment of our system. He also said Illinois American was going to replace all the lead pipes into our homes at no cost to owners. But that hasn't happened either. As a private company, Illinois American doesn't have to show its financial information to us. And we are the ones who pay the bills. We don't know what their repair plans are. They won't tell us how much money they take from Peoria. This is a monopoly. We hired you, the council, to seriously look at our community's needs and to use your best judgment to build our community.
Next up, we have Gail Thetford.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Madam Clerk. My name is Gail Thetford. I live at 3600 North Knoxville here in Peoria. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that Illinois American Water and perhaps even some of its supporters would promote the premise that revenues from a municipally owned water system can't be used for any purpose outside of the water system. They did write a book about how they've bemused and befuddled the public and political leaders in their never-ending pursuit and acquisition of water systems. Nothing could be further from the truth. For starters, in 2005, the city's own consultants recommended the use of a $1.1 million general oversight fee, new revenue for the city coffers, an oversight fee to essentially be, owning the system and managing it. The consultants projected, in addition, over $188 million in surplus revenue over a 33-year financing period. Such surplus or profit can indeed be used for other purposes, not the least of which could be reducing water rates. In 2008, the city's former corporation counsel, Randy Ray, cited case law which stated that a municipality was entitled to make a reasonable profit from a water utility, and that 5 to 7% would be just such a reasonable range. Rick Joseph, a local attorney with the firm Miller, Hall & Triggs, pretty familiar with the Illinois Municipal Code, currently serving as counsel to Illinois Central College and to the city of East Peoria, which happens to own its own water utility, states that rates charged by municipal utilities must be fair and reasonable. However, that doesn't prohibit a city from allocating reasonable expenses to the operations, nor does it preclude the city from realizing a reasonable surplus from operations. If the city is concerned about having express statutory authority for use of any surplus, even though the city is home rule, it would not need to rely on specific statutory authority. Section 11-139 of the Illinois Municipal Code expressly authorizes combined waterworks and sewage systems. So, without any question whatsoever, Peoria could combine the systems, use the surplus from the water system to fund improvements to the storm sewer system and any other CSO costs, and abolish that lovely new stormwater fee that we're all so excited to pay, on top of some of the highest property taxes in the nation. The bottom line is that there are multiple options: rate relief, transfers to the general fund, abolishing other fees, and substantial latitude for the use of surplus funds from a city's ownership of a water utility. If you don't have to pay profits to shareholders, it's amazing what can be done for the sustainability of the water system, the rate relief to the community, and the financial viability of the city. But you don't have to take my word for it, or you don't have to take the word of an attorney who represents a municipally owned water system, or you don't even have to take the word of your own former corporation counsel. You can and you should vote to pursue due diligence and find out for yourself. Thank you.
Next up is Janice Lindsay.
My name is Janice Lindsay. I live in the 61615 area code. My family moved to Illinois when I was a little girl, 9 months old. I'm not going to tell you my age. But what I'm concerned about this evening is the petition of 18301, where it talks about communication from the council members, Sid Rodrigo, with the request for a first reading of the following, which is to approve a resolution excluding city council members from participating IMRF. That concerns me based upon these city council members that we currently have may not be reelected in the future. So how will that serve the other city council members that may be coming in? The other was the approve the resolution to also exclude city council members from participating in Peoria health plan. We need to take in consideration that in the event someone's not elected back in, those that may be voted in, they may need those benefits, because as far as I'm concerned, we look at the hours that need to be spent doing more things to create revenue in this city. And I would like to also add in that I would like to see some type of report done based upon this decision to be even considered. I'd like the study to be done, but I'd also like to include in that study that we monitor your hours that you spend working on the city council. Is there anything in place that monitors? Because I know that you all have full-time jobs, or either you have businesses that you run. So in that, and I'm just a citizen here, and I'm trying to find out why my city's dying. And if there's anything that I can do to help revive it, I'm going to do that. I got 9 grandchildren here, and it doesn't look like we're going anywhere. So with that request being made, there's also this last C, to adopt an ordinance setting the compensation for certain elected officials of the city of Peoria. Who are those elected officials that you're looking to set this ordinance on? Thank you.
Next up, we have Joseph Kerala.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Joseph Kerala. I came here tonight as a very concerned and troubled business owner and resident of the city of Peoria. I feel that this city has been headed in the wrong direction for many years now. I truly can't wrap my head around how any fiscally responsible council member who has the best interest of our community could in good conscience vote yes for this water buyout. For many years now, our city council has made many bad decisions and gave this city away, leaving the resident taxpayer to foot the bill. I could spend a long time giving examples of frivolous decisions the city council has made over the years. But for the purpose of time, I'll just leave you with a couple of examples to ponder as you decide on how to vote on this issue. We have lost millions in many bad decisions like the Damon's restaurant debacle or the Hotel Pier Marquette fiasco, or the avoidance of dealing with the rain sewage runoff infrastructure till now, just to name a few. But today we are here to discuss the water buyout and why I feel this city council should not pursue this matter. I truly have zero confidence that the city can tackle the logistics of running the water company and maintaining its vast, complex infrastructure. Let's be honest, the city can't even handle our budget right now. Years ago, a referendum was held for the buyout, and the residents of Peoria voted no. I still support this position, and with a strong conviction, I still say no. I am here tonight to urge every one of you on this council to support the residents of Peoria and vote no to this water buyout. With an out-of-control budget, a large debt that has or will soon break the city, a looming city employee layoff, I feel the council has more pertinent issues to deal with. It's simply not a viable option at this time. We must focus on the problems at hand and not help create new problems that residents will end up footing the bill for years down the road. Thank you for your time, and I hope you address my concerns with a vote no on the water buyout. Thank you.
Next up, we have Shelley Epstein.
Hello again. I'll be short this time, I promise. It was Shelley Epstein in District 3. It was encouraging to hear your debate tonight about the budget. It was a sober, serious debate, and I applaud you for that. I was buoyed by hearing you looking for the best possibility from other communities. You talked about Chicago and its parking, its car fee. You talked about the fund balances in other communities, and you talked about Danville. You adopted that tax. So you're looking at other communities for the best practices, and that's a positive thing. So I know when it comes to this water issue, you will look to other communities for their best practices. You won't say, I don't care what happens in those other communities, we're doing what we know is best. You'll look for other things. I want to build off of something Gail Thetford talked about. I'm not an attorney, as you know, nor do I play one, but we consult with folks who are multiple municipal attorneys, and one of those was Rick Joseph, whose firm represents a number of communities. And Councilman Riggenbach, this goes to your pertinent question, and I believe you have been sent this, but I know you've been gone. And so let me just read you this paragraph. And you don't have to believe me. Talk to him, okay? And I quote, if the city is concerned about having express statutory authority for use of any surplus, water surplus, then even though the city is home rule and would not need to rely solely upon this statutory authority, Section 11-139, call that to your attention, of the Municipal Code expressly authorizes combined waterworks and sewerage systems. A sewerage system is defined to specifically include storm sewers. I've got a site for that, but you don't need that. Thus, the city could easily and with clear statutory authority, by combining the waterworks and the sewage system, use the surplus from the water system to fund improvements to the storm water system and perhaps eliminate the most recently enacted stormwater utility fee, or part of it. That impacts every person, business, and governmental body in the city of Peoria. You have statutory authority to use water revenue for stormwater abatement fee. You just increased taxes on all of us. This is a way to avoid that. If you don't want to do that, you could reduce the water rates. If the revenues comes in, it's too much. You have enormous latitude to do different things. But first, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because no one who supports this proposition is saying buy the water company, despite what the t-shirts of our friends say, no buyout. We're just saying get the facts, please. I hope they're not saying don't get the facts. So if we get the facts, if the facts don't prove this case is reasonable, then we'll back away from that. You won't hear from us ever again, which would be good for all of us. But the idea that you're severely restricted in using excess water revenue or profits, there's ways to do that. You have promised in this budget to turn over every rock. I applaud you for that. This is a big rock. I hope you'll look under it as well. Thank you.
Next up, we have Joe Connor.
Connor, Chattanooga, Tennessee, representing Illinois American Water Company. A couple of things tonight, and again, I'm not going to get into all the other issues that have been raised, and I'm impressed with the council because you did hit on many of the issues that we think are important when you're evaluating this agreement. And corporate counsel has done, I think, a good job in assessing where you are and what you can do with those dollars. But I think the few points we want to make, and I want to make just real briefly. One, what are the strings with respect to this contract? The biggest string that you have is that it forces you as a council to vote to take over the water company according to the franchise provision. It is not simply a let's kick the tires, let's take a look at this and see. The second thing it does too, that I think is very important, if not even as much as this, is that you cannot stop the process. What you're paying for here is an appraisal for your appraiser that would be hired in an appraisal team. I get budgets from those teams when we hire appraisers. There are no budgets being presented from potential candidates tonight to give you an idea how much this will cost. Getting to the point, where did you come up with $400,000? Because, folks, I've done this for 20 years now. It will cost more than $400,000 to go through this process. It just does. I've never seen one, even without the franchise litigation issues that you don't have this time, $400,000 will not be enough. And there is no guarantee from the CEO Council of any additional funds, and you don't have the money. And I think you can see that now, and I'm not being critical. It's just the way your budget is. And I'm very sympathetic with respect to that. So if you get your appraisal, and the appraisal does come in too high, before you even go through the arbitration process, you can't stop because the agreement requires you to go through the entire process. So that's something. It's not just a look. You're paying experts to tell you how much it's worth during the process to present at an arbitration. If you get to that point, you get your appraisal, and your own appraisal says it's too much, then you should be able to stop. You can't. If you do, you've got to repay them the money. That's the process. With respect to timing, why did it take this long? I was here in February 2018 when it was presented. Everyone around the shoe said, let's get an agreement. Let's see what the terms are before we agree to this. Why did it take 8 months? Why did it take 3 weeks before you have to vote on this in order to get this agreement? What happened in the interim? And folks, this 3-page document that we prepared, presented on your desk earlier, is from us. It's from Illinois American Water. It lays out the facts on the PAG deal that you all have been discussing tonight. Rita Kress is a fine individual, I know. And I'm not saying that she controls the CEO Council, but the fact of the matter is, from 1998, this council is having to deal with decisions that were made then. And you're paying for it. And the citizens are going to have to pay for it through a property tax or through cuts and expenses. They say, forget the past. Don't forget the past. Learn from it. That's what we suggest that you do. With that, Illinois American Water firmly believes that the path forward is to be with you and as partners. And that's what we want to do. We want to help you through this process. Roger's going to say a few things this evening about how we may be able to do that. And what I'm talking about is not the decision to buy the water company, because it just doesn't stack up if you look at it factually. It's decision on how to go forward in the community. And that's what this company has been doing ever since it's been formed, and in particular over the past 20 years. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Anthony Walraven.
Anthony Walraven. I live at 1927 West Hudson, 61604. Sorry I'm late. I had to work late. I'm here to kind of I support doing due diligence to see whether or not we should buy the water company. My property taxes are too high, and I know that Peoria is broke. But I think that requires us to look at different ways to raise revenue as opposed to continuing to do the same things that we've done in the past. And 10 years ago, or 1998 rather, this city had the opportunity to do what you're considering to do now. And if we had done that in 1998, I don't think that we'd be in the kind of budget crisis that we're in right now. We've tried literally almost everything else to get out of this budget crisis. There are towns all over the Midwest that own their own water companies that aren't in as bad a budget crisis as the city of Peoria is. And, you know, I've just been kind of shocked as just a normal citizen. I'm not one of the people putting up the money to do this due diligence. I'm just a regular person. At the amount of stuff I get in the mail from the water company, I mean, you just get bombarded with it. 2 or 3 mailers, and there's billboards all over town. And I get that, because if I owned a very profitable company that sent millions of dollars a year out of the city to, and just let me read off who the top 5 shareholders of American Water, because that's Illinois American Water is a division of American Water, which is a multinational publicly traded corporation based in New Jersey. Here are the 5 largest shareholders of of American Water: Vanguard Group, BlackRock, which is a hedge fund, T. Rowe Price and Associates, which is another investment vehicle, State Street Corp., which is one of the 8 banks that received TARP money in the 2008 banking crash, and then BlackRock Institutional Trust Company, which is a shell company of BlackRock, which is a hedge fund. So this is a company owned by hedge funds. This is not a company like a mom and pop, family-run business. It's a hedge fund. It's owned by hedge funds. There's nothing to stop them from selling our water company to Nestle. And Nestle comes in and they build bottling plants up and down the St. Chris Reservoir. There's nothing to stop that because we don't own our water company. Water's a natural monopoly. We have to buy it. We have no choice, and there's no competition. It's not like someone else can come in and they can set up an alternative water company in Peoria to compete with American Water. So we should be like the vast majority of municipalities in the United States that own their own water company. We are actually an anomaly in not owning it. It is a revenue-producing asset. The city needs extra revenue. We are hesitant to raise it by taxes because of how large our tax burden is already. This, to me, is an issue of, are we going to look at the 6 inches in front of our face, or are we going to look at what's going to affect the city 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road? For too long in this city, we've only looked at what the 6 inches in front of our face are, and we see what the result of that is. It's a near bankrupt city that has laid off hundreds of employees in the last 10 years. How many more employees can we possibly lay off to balance our budget? How many more? What city services can you sit here and say can credibly be cut to balance our budget? How many less firefighters can there be on the streets? How many less police officers? How many less code enforcement people? How many less building public works people can you credibly say that we can do without to balance our budget as a city of over 100,000 people? We have to think outside the box of ways to balance our budget. Taking the water company into public ownership is one of the ways that we can do that. And I share the distrust of some people in this city of the city government. But we as a city can change who sits on the city council much easier than we can change who's on the board of American Water. We are never going to be able to buy the 10% of the stock that is owned by the Vanguard Group or the 5% of the stock that's owned by BlackRock Incorporated. I can change a city council member much easier than I can get on the board or someone else can get on the board of American Water. I trust the city government much more than I trust a multinational corporation based in New Jersey. So I urge you at the very least to take advantage of the money that's being offered, to look into seeing of whether or not this is a good deal. And if it's not, then we shouldn't do it. But we owe it to ourselves to just for once think about something more than 6 months down the road and see if we can do something that would benefit the city. Thank you very much.
Next we have Roger Goodson.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. We've got a couple more weeks, so I'm really not going into what I really want to talk about is what nobody's really mentioned yet tonight, and that's about our employees, our proud union employees. They work very hard every day to provide safe drinking water to you, your constituents, and they do an excellent job. But every 5 years, they have to go through this buyout discussion. If you think it's not wearing on them and their families, think again. It's unfair to them. It'd be a different story if they didn't provide excellent service, safeguard your water source, or care for the customers. But they do, and they don't want the buyout. Continuing on, our research shows year after year that Peoria residents, your constituents, also do not support a buyout. Now, the opponents can try to disregard the research simply because it doesn't support their agenda. But we work with Public Opinion Strategies to conduct our research, and they are a company that works with CNN, the Natural Conservancy, and many other credible companies. They are credible, and the numbers are similar to the referendum results, as we heard earlier tonight in 2003, when the price was appraised at $220 million, and 82% of the voters said, don't purchase the water system. Today, with our significant investments in the local system since then, it is fair to predict that the purchase price would be well over $300 million. Buyout backers consistently say they wouldn't purchase the system at that price, yet they continue to pursue this buyout. The reality is the purchase price would be much more than $300 million. There's no good reason to throw money at a buyout and repeat this history. There's no good reason to partner with the same folks the city now owes that we've heard twice or all night tonight, over $2 million from the last effort. The city has many more important priorities that we heard tonight. Again, buyout backers state the water system would be a revenue stream. I think you even heard your own corporate counsel say tonight that there's a limit to the profit that would be available. I know that from a fact for when I worked for a municipal system at the city of Aurora. You have to have an enterprise fund, and you can't pave roads or keep fire stations open. Also, there's over $5 million a year that will disappear from permit and taxes. This was not represented in the CEO Council report, and that would go away. They also don't account for the annual investment needed to ensure the water system remains reliable and that the drinking water is safe. And that's very concerning to not only me, but I should be concerning to the entire city. Seizing critical water system investment would be detrimental to public health and safety. They also don't take into account for the cost of service the city would need to take on, including billing, customer service, at all hours of the day. But buyout backers, they don't concern themselves with these things or how losing Illinois American would impact costs, customers, rates, and service. They will tell you, what's the harm in taking another look? Well, I think we all know what the harm is. It's not just a look, and it's still costing you guys from 20 years ago. And during that last buyout effort, just to add on to that, the city spent an additional $500,000 of their own funds. And when they decided against the purchase, they then had to pay Illinois American over $250,000 in legal fees. So the $400,000 or $700,000 is not going to do it. So as city leaders, I know you are interested in hearing both sides. We appreciate the positive working relationship that we have with you guys, and I believe working together is what's best for us. And on that note, we heard that, let's look at assets that you guys have. I think we all know how we can help with some of the assets that you have. So I think we need to discuss that further. A takeover of the water system would result in additional debt, remove the Illinois Commerce Commission oversight, and it would continue to burden Peoria residents with additional costs. It isn't the answer. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Mr. Clerk.
We have no executive session, and we are at adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn by Councilman Sears, seconded by Councilman Reckriegel. Please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. We'd like to thank our listening and viewing audience, and tonight's budget meeting is adjourned.